Good morning, colleagues. Just checking you can hear us online.
Loud and clear, Bill.
Thanks very much, John. Okay, good morning and welcome to our February meeting of Somerset Council Executive here at the John Meikle Room in House in Taunton. It's only executive lead members present in the room who are taking decisions at this meeting. Others in attendance are here to provide advice. There's no planned fire drills today, and in the event of a fire alarm, please follow the fire exit signs and congregate in the car park. Anybody might need assistance to do that, please let one of the Democratic Services team know. And the agenda and papers have been published on the council website in advance of the meeting. The council recognises the importance of striking a balance between providing opportunities for the lawful expression of views and any unacceptable behaviours or actions that cause disruption will lead to our meetings being adjourned. The council will be making a recording of the meeting and this will be published in due course. So today's meeting will be run using a hybrid format. Executive lead members and key officers are physically present here in the John Meikle Room at Dean House, but other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting on specific agenda items or to observe. The meeting is being broadcast, and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. If you are joining us online, please use the meeting chat function only for the purposes of the meeting. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand using the hands up function and say your name before speaking. Otherwise, please can we ensure that all microphones and cameras are turned off when not speaking. Apologies for absence. I can see all executive lead members are present here in the room. And we've got associate lead members. We've got Dave Wone sending his apologies. He's attending an event in London on my behalf. Any other apologies? And minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of January. Those have been circulated. Moment to refresh your memories. And any amendments to those? Not seeing anybody indicated. Let's have a proposer, please. Liz Lyshawn, seconded Heather Shearer. Those in favour of accepting those minutes, those against. That's clearly carried, and I will duly sign. Are there any declarations of interest in today's agenda? I'm not seeing any. Which brings us on to public question time, and we have two public questions before us today from Taunton Town Council and from Mr. David Orr. And so first of all, can I invite Marcus Prowse to speak on behalf of Taunton Town Council?
Thank you. Yeah, this is a statement about the High Street car park. On 20th of November, Taunton Town Council wrote to the Executive of Somerset Council to express strong opposition to the proposed disposal of this key car park. This letter, which followed a motion passed at our full council meeting in November, requested an urgent response. Thank you for formally replying on Friday last week. I have now shared the letter with town councillors. Town council's concerns are supported by significant community opposition, demonstrated by a petition with over 1,700 signatures. The car park in question plays a vital role in supporting the local economy and providing safe, accessible parking for residents and visitors. Its loss would have a detrimental impact on businesses, community activities, and overall vibrancy, while also reducing access for vulnerable groups who rely on convenient parking facilities. We are aware of recent public statements indicating that the sale of this asset is still being considered, pending advice on alternative uses. Whilst we understand the financial pressures facing Somerset Council, we believe that collaborative discussions could identify alternative solutions that safeguard the long-term interests of the community. Options such as improved management or income-generating partnerships should be fully explored before making any irreversible decisions. Our offer to meet remains open, and we urge Somerset Council to engage constructively with us to ensure that decisions made benefit both our town and the wider area for years to come. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And I've got two names to respond. I'm not sure who's first. Is it Councillor Rigby first? Thank you.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for the question from Taunton Town Council. We've replied by letter, but I will summarise that now. The parking service has identified this asset as being surplus. In this instance, what is meant by surplus is that the parking capacity in use at High Street can easily fit within the underutilised space within the Orchard Centre car park immediately next door. This would enable us to focus our resources on operating and maintaining one multi-storey asset instead of two, whilst retaining the same level of in-use parking capacity. The council made a decision to dispose of a number of surplus assets, of which High Street Car Park was one. We are awaiting pre-planning advice on future uses, which would impact on the potential capital receipt. And once we have this information, a final decision on disposal can be reached. And I'll just add that I am aware of the fact that I've said we're awaiting pre-planning advice on a number of occasions, so I've chased that up last week.
Thank you, and I just confirmed that I'm very happy to talk with Taunton Town Council on this issue, and we'll see whether we can find a way forward that everybody is happy with if we can. Okay, and secondly, we've got Mr. David Orr. David.
Morning. Beware the credibility gap being filled by magic IT and aspirations rather than planning and delivery. This Labour government is promising AI and a third Heathrow runway while they sit on a national social care burning platform, which they will ignore until 2029. The iceberg of bankruptcy will sink Somerset long before 2029. Should the leader of this council have flown over to Davos in a private jet to sit alongside non-doms, private equity and global bankers to lobby Rachel Reeves to fully fund social care? My Santander Bank invested in self-service technologies via a fully transactional website and a smartphone app before they reduced staff numbers and closed branches. I have visited my local branch maybe once in the past 2 years. I hardly ever phone the call centre. With 1 year to plan and almost 2 years as a new council, how many transactional e-services rather than forms on the website going into old manual back office processes have you implemented? There's no smartphone app either. Last week, the auditor, Grant Thornton, stated, the council is delivering the workforce reduction programme before the development of the detailed transformation programme business case, and, this is surprising, before key enabler projects related to ICT data and process improvement have been implemented. Despite the auditor's red flag, the council is pushing on with 555 staff leaving, many compulsory, without the vital enabling projects being completed. Isn't that tantamount to ignoring the government-appointed auditor? In the haystack of papers, did any of you spot the needle? Extraordinarily, service levels are going to be decided after the 555 staff have gone. Surely the horse goes before the cart. Business as usual efficiency by unitary rationalisation and removing duplicated management is not, in my view, transformation. You are also using magic AI to bridge your own credibility gap, while you still have 6 planning systems and 5 environmental health systems, rather than one unitary system for each service. In spite of a financial emergency, you've made the finance director subordinate to the executive directors who spend the money. There is no chief information officer at board level. Councillors know better. South West 1 for County and Taunton Deane councils with Magic IT, SAP ERP failed spectacularly. Ignite was procured to deliver a digital revolution for Taunton Deane and South Somerset councils. Under 10% of the promised enabling technologies and transactional web services were delivered in Taunton Deane before the staff were expensively made redundant and in many cases were rehired or replaced with costly agency staff. 10 million or more lost with a chaotic year to recover services. Audit Committee reported that the South Somerset 22-23 accounts were late, so this has delayed the 23-24 accounts for this new council. My concern is that letting staff go before the enabling projects complete risks similar service disruption. Can you assure the people of Somerset that with so many staff going before any enabling projects complete, we won't see the same disastrous outcomes? Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you for keeping within your time. So, in answer to your question about whether I'm going to jet off to Davos, I'm afraid the financial emergency prevents that from happening. So I will use a loud hailer instead. Councillor Butt-Philip.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd also remind you of the fact that Somerset Council has declared a climate emergency, so the use of private jets is not something we will be exploring. Thank you very much for your questions, Mr. Orr. Taking them in turn, firstly, the IT element of the transformation programme has been designed to deliver significant cost savings and cost avoidance alongside application consolidation. One notable example is the new income management system, which has successfully removed 12 interfaces from Dynamics and avoided a 238,000 in ongoing costs. Our programme of IT systems and application consolidation is ongoing, ranging from moving to a single revenues and benefits application, improving the functionality of MS Dynamics, and developing our SAP HR system. Secondly, as you see from the papers being considered today, the risks and issues and impacts associated with the Council's restructuring programme have been considered based upon the feedback from each individual service area. Our financial position has meant that the Council has to work at pace to redesign its structures to support its financial sustainability and continue to deliver services to the residents of Somerset. By way of example, enabling projects utilising IT system improvements and AI have been running alongside the Workforce Transformation Programme, focusing on personal productivity and operational efficiency savings within the services such as social care to reduce the impact of a reduced workforce.
Thank you, Councillor Philip. And so we move on to item 5 on the agenda, the Executive Forward Plan. Any comments or questions arising from the forward plan? Not seeing anything, so that is duly noted. And then we move on to Council Organisation Restructure, which is on pages 9 to 130 on the papers. Thank you. I'll call on Councillor Theo Butt-Philip to introduce the item.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to present the report on the Council Organisation Restructure. This represents the culmination of an enormous amount of work across the organisation to help Somerset Council create a structure which will support our financial sustainability. The staff of Somerset Council have been living with uncertainty ever since the spectre of unitarisation raised its head, and hopefully as a result of this completion of the restructure, we will be able to draw a line under that uncertainty. We have, as we all know, as a result of the financial emergency, had to go considerably further with this restructure than was ever envisaged. But what we have in front of us are proposals which will help us to become a sustainable organisation going forward. I want to say an enormous amount of thanks to our staff who have been through this process for their feedback and for their continued professionalism, and a huge thanks to everyone within the HR team and across the organisation for the work that they have put in to get these proposals to the stage that they are at. And without further ado, I will hand over to Alan Jones, who will take us through some more of the report.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the introduction. I just wanted to set out the fact that this report is a culmination of a significant period of work across the organisation for over 12 months now. Since the declaration of our financial emergency and the agreement of the design principles set out earlier in 2024, there's been a significant amount of work across each and every service area to consider the shape and form of the organisation in order to address not only the financial emergency, but safe and sound operating principles. This has resulted as well in a significant period of engagement with services and staff across the organisation and elected members as we've gone through this process over the last 12 months. This culminated in a significant period of formal consultation at the end of last calendar year. This consultation was extended to ensure that any feedback from relevant staff and trade unions could be taken into account, and any adjustments that were made to address that consultation feedback were also subsequently consulted upon with those impacted individuals. As part of this report today, as Councillor Buckphilip has introduced, there are a number of impacts that have been identified. It is really clear that going through this level of change and this level of reorganisation at the pace that we have worked at will inevitably change how services are delivered and how they are operated. This report is clear on where those impacts are likely to be felt, and the mitigating steps, where possible, have been taken into account. In addition, there are service quality impact assessments where, following detailed assessment, there is a belief that there will be impacted on those vulnerable individuals that receive those services. Those impacts are limited to 3 individual service areas, and members can see the details set out in this report. In essence, as part of the overall proposal, the challenge that was set to officers as part of the budget setting this financial year we are in, was to find savings between 30 and 40 million pounds as a result of workforce restructuring. We can report today that we are reaching a target of 34 million pounds worth of reductions associated with this, and the report sets out exactly how those reductions can be seen across each individual service area. Finally, Chair, through you, the appendices set out in particular the impacts that have been identified. I just want to make sure that members are clear on what those impacts are. So as part of that presentation that's been appended, and these have been through various levels of member briefings as we've proceeded over the last few weeks, setting out precisely the impact that's been identified by the service, where possible the steps that can be taken to address those, and in particular where there is a need for additional mitigations to come through as a result of either increasing a budget or addressing a particular restructuring challenge, all of which have been set out and considered in that report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. And just looking to see whether Councillor Stephen Pugsley from the Chair of Scrutiny is online or in the room, and I can't see him. I've got reference in my notes to feedback from Scrutiny. Do we have access to that? I can't see it in the papers. I've just had a look at that. I can only see the advice relating to item 7. Am I looking at the wrong bit? I believe Mr. Jones has got it. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. The feedback from Scrutiny was published on following the meeting, so it published, I believe, on Friday. There is a range of elements covered in the feedback report, but principally I'll just cover off the main bits of feedback that came through Scrutiny. And at this point, I'd like to thank the engagement from Scrutiny we've had over the last year in terms of not only the overall programme, but also their feedback on risks, issues, and the particular concerns around the workforce restructuring proposals. The feedback that was noted and agreed was that committee agreed the recommendations within the report, however, expressed considerable concern about the need to maintain service delivery and sufficient capacity in relation to the following services: planning and enforcement, highways, legal services, the climate team, and waste services. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And those comments are duly noted, and we thank the Scrutiny Committee for all those. Okay, can I open it up to comments from members of the executive first? Councillor Sarah Wakefield.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I welcome this report and the breadth that it covers of the task that we've undertaken. First of all, I'd like to say that, when Unitary came forwards, we all knew that part of that was to save money. And, with the districts coming together with the county, if you save money, you're going to probably have less services. It's really difficult. I mean, that's something that's kind of implicit to me in getting rid of districts and bringing them all into one council. So that's my first point. I think it's really important going forwards that the service directors do report, as it mentions in the report, on the impact on the staff, performance, productivity, and what it means for our residents. I think we need to keep that in mind the whole time and to keep making sure that that's available so that people know. This sort of restructuring, as we know, cannot be done overnight. I mean, in some ways, it would have been lovely to have done this on the 1st of April 2023, but I think probably completely impossible at the pace with which the councils came together. I think it's important to remember that, because had we had more time for the districts to unwind and perhaps be scaled back a bit before they came together with the county council, it would have been different, but that wasn't happening. And this sort of change has been described as like repairing or reshaping an aircraft while it's in flight. And, you know, you need to remember that we are trying to keep the show on the road. We are keeping the show on the road, but we're trying to do major change at the same time. So I think that's important to remember. It is bruising and damaging for everybody and for staff in particular. But I do want to say this morning, and I think it's an opportunity too. We must see this as an opportunity to have a better shaped council doing the things that we want to do and doing them well. In number 5 on page 12, talk about the implementation of the structure and the objectives and things that we're looking forward to doing and what we will continue to do. So I think that's important to remember. I'm pleased to note that the inequalities implications are noted carefully too. We are unlike America. We are not going to drop looking at our equalities and diversity policies. We're going to make sure they are front and centre of what we do. So I wanted to express support for everybody who's been part of this, and the use of AI, which is mentioned as well, will mean that certainly in adult social care, we have shorter time for writing reports. It means that they can be done much more quickly and our staff will have more opportunities for face-to-face contact, which is a really good thing for us. So we must embrace those opportunities too. We're doing a restructure in our housing service too. This is needed. And you know, I'm really glad that we're having these opportunities to do this, and we do note the risks, but we are excited by the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Liz?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take this opportunity, if I may, to thank the Chief Executive and the officers who responded to all the concerns put forward by the Executive during the period of consultation. So we put forward our concerns under the 4 council priorities and the overarching priority of efficient, effective council. And as those headings started with highways and worked through planning and enforcement and all the other things that we see here, plus many others, I know that I can say that that consultation period was well worth the time and that there was proper, effective response from the executive leadership team of this council to the concerns that were put forward by the executive and the administration. So I'm not at all surprised that the response from scrutiny was similar in places, a bit more narrow than it was from us. But let's be fair, we spent a great deal of time putting forward our response to the consultation, and our thanks are due to the executive leadership team. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking around for any other comments or questions. Heather?
I thank you. My colleagues have stolen my thunder in lots of ways on the thanks and on the opportunity comment, but I just wanted to point to it's a very full suite of papers, as many of these items are today, and I think the appendix C3, which talks through the special educational need changes, I think is really, you know, if you haven't read it before, it's definitely worth a read, because again, that's another opportunity where we're saying, yes, we have to do this for all kinds of financial sustainability reasons, but let's make this an opportunity to make sure that our SEND and inclusion education work better as a result of this process. And I think it's quite nicely explained in there. So I just wanted to point that out as well. And I think also the point about, I think the consultations, we've done consultations which are not just giving people a time to think about it, then we do it anyway. Our consultations are where we listen to people, and that's marvellous. And I know certainly on the SEND side of things, we've also taken into account our children and young people's needs, which of course is the most important thing. The people who are going to be drawing on those services, benefiting from the services, the ones we want to hear from. So just wanted to point out, because I think there's an awful lot of work in here, and always happy for people to make sure they read it and see all the information.
Thank you. I'd particularly like to thank officers for the service level impact assessments that were included in the slides, which were really helpful just to understand the impacts that will be on the areas that were outlined by the scrutiny committee as well. Okay. And if that's all, executive and associate league members? Sorry, Liz, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I missed something. It's important that we understand that the staff who've been tupied across to the city, town, parish councils are not lost to Somerset. So they show as a reduction in staffing of this council, but they are still working in and for Somerset. And that is, it's a bigger figure of actual staff members, but as an FTE, it is still a very significant figure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to other members. Oh, sorry, Graham. I thought you were indicating that somebody else in the room wants to speak, and apparently it's you.
I was chair, but while I'm actually in the room for a change, and I apologise for my absence, I think I probably have the best excuse. And it is a real actually pleasure and privilege to be in the room this morning. Can I just say on this whole thing, I've been impressed with the way that the structures, the process, the council is listening to the staff under an incredibly difficult time. But I just want to make the point about my concern about the disconnection that exists between central government and local government, in that central government decided Somerset would be reorganised. Wasn't our idea. Central government made that decision, but then did not see that project through. If central government was in the private sector, it would fail within a week. It cannot function with disconnection. It needs to work with local government closely, and I'm hoping the government will listen to us, because had we been properly resourced, and we could have approached this in a different way, the questioner was questioning. Well, the reality was that choices were very limited because of the financial emergency, and that we still have limited choices. But we do need the government to connect with local government, to listen and to work with us to provide the services that the people of Somerset need, and to allow our staff to perform to their highest level. The government have actually inhibited that over the last sort of 12 months, I would say, and hopefully, or 24 months. Hopefully now we will see a more positive way forward.
Thank you, Graham, and indeed welcome to your first in-person meeting, and it's great to see you in such good health. I would echo that point about central government. I've had numerous approaches from other council leaders who may have local government reorganisation thrust upon them for thoughts about the way forwards at the moment. So we will watch this space. So I've got 3 members indicated to speak so far. Dave Mansell online, and Lucy Trimnell, and Andy Dingwall in the room, and Diogo Rodriguez. Okay, so we'll go to Dave Mansell first.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I would like to make a few comments, please. And I am pleased to see some of the changes that have followed the consultation process, especially to highways maintenance, where there had been a big cut in staff planned, which has now changed, I'm pleased to see, and also improvements in the rights of way team. The comments I would like to note. First one in relation to planning. There's a proposal to take planning enforcement back to red priority areas only, which I think is cutting it much too far. Our ray of hope here is that in the next item on your agenda, there is a growth bid to reinstate some of the planning enforcement team. So I do strongly urge support to that, but feel I should draw attention to this report taking planning enforcement back too far, but hopefully that will be immediately addressed. There's another factor on planning which is a little bit more complicated, and I think very much for officers to get right in implementation. In that currently we have on the legal side of things interim locum staff who have long served the council very well and know the area, know how the system works. There's a proposal to move that to permanent staff. Now, I don't know all the issues here, but clearly there's been a reason why they've been interim and locum. And we do need to be really careful. Sometimes when we make these changes, the quality of the service deteriorates markedly. We've seen this happen, so that change needs to be made with great care, please. On waste services, and this is subject to one of the service impact quality one of the assessments, quality assessments, and this draws attention to two things. One, that the staff cut, and we're taking the waste services team down from what was 23 when Somerset Council started, and which was already one team serving the whole of Somerset. We're taking that team of 23 down to 13. This is a big reduction in staff, and the assessment draws attention to the fact that we may not be able to adequately serve vulnerable people and ensure their needs are met. So there's a big cut coming there. And the other problem is that we could be making a false economy, in that it will be difficult to implement service rules, again because of lack of staff, and help people with those. The result could be more waste going into disposal instead of recycling, and that costs the council more. So we do need to be, again, very careful, and my feeling is we're cutting the team back too far, and the qualities assessment that we've got draws attention to the big risk and probability of that. The final one I'd like to draw attention to is in the climate team. Now, we've got lots of good aspirations to deal with the climate emergency. Pleased it's been noted already. But we're taking the central team down. Originally, we were going to take it down to 1. As I now understand it, it looks like it will be 2. That will not, in my view, enable what we're aspiring to do to be delivered. Is cut back too far. Now, yes, much of it can and should be delivered across the teams directly. That is the good thing to do. But we do need a central corporate team to do some things where there's other teams not well placed to take a lead on them, and just to ensure that corporately we're moving forward in the right way. And in my view, a team of 2 is too small. I hope this can that aspect can be given further consideration when it comes back to full council. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for those constructive thoughts and comments. So just looking for responses on the planning first, and I can see Mr. Hall reaching for his microphone. Chris.
Yeah, morning everybody. So yes, these comments did come through quite strongly as part of the discussions within scrutiny. Excuse me, and we were able to confirm that whilst the workforce reduction does clearly identify a loss of roles within planning, there is a separate pressure bid that's been put forward to full council to reinstate those roles and ultimately bring us to a more stable planning service. So the modelling has been done with support of external consultants to understand the level of volume that we receive into the council and how many officers we would need in a steady state. So that proposed uplift for the pressure bid recognises those changes and makes those requests, both in terms of planning officers and the DM function, but also in planning enforcement as well. So those would bring us to a steady state planning service. We do still need to deal with the backlog. There is a current backlog, and we're looking at that as a separate matter. If I may, I'll just comment on the waste concerns as well. I think that the point I made for many of these at scrutiny was this was exactly the right conversation. So there are reductions in a number of services, and we need to be really clear and honest about that. I would say with the waste service, previously it was a partnership arrangement servicing 5 councils in different ways. That builds a level of governance internally, it builds in process, much of which has been removed by the fact that it's now a single service being provided against, or rather on behalf of, a single council. So some of the reductions here are around genuine efficiencies. We are looking to mitigate some of the further risks around how we further embed that in the regulatory and operational services. So it is still there as a head of function role and a service in its own right, but there are crossovers here as we embed new services and functions together. There are crossovers into much of our operational world. So we will look to make further efficiencies and remove the mitigation, or rather mitigate any of the impacts as we progress. And the climate points, again, valid points. However, it's incumbent upon all of us, so whether that be officers, managers, people responsible for purchasing, procuring activity, commissioning, members as well, it is incumbent upon us all to consider the climate impacts of the day-to-day activities that we undertake. So we need to embed that to a greater fashion across the way the organisation works. But yes, there is a reduction, and that is noted within the reports.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So moving on to Lucy Triminall next. Good morning, Lucy.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. So I'm referring to the service impacts for adults, operations and housing. I asked a few questions, specific questions at Corporate and Resources last week. I wanted to ask Councillor Wakefield more generally, so we've got a report in front of us with impacts and mitigations. I wondered whether Councillor Wakefield could give a more general comment on how she sees these impacts affecting the operations in this department. I did note that the impact assessments at the end of this had suggested there was a disproportionate effect on older people, disabled and less mobile people. And I wondered whether that was also a concern. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. I mean, I think there's always a concern about reshaping what you're doing. And one of the problems with adult social care has been that, you know, we've tried to keep costs under control. In fact, we've been very successful following the Newton programme in doing that in certain areas. But if you reduce the number of people on the ground who are going to see people, then you will have some impact. Now, I think we do have to bear in mind that some of our services, I can think of one in particular, have been going quite a long time in the way they're going. And although we constantly look at them, some of them do need reshaping as we move forwards with better tech and with better arrangements for keeping people at home for longer and things like that. I do think that we have got an opportunity here, but I can't disguise the fact that we're all concerned, and we will monitor what happens as a result of this and keep an eye on it. But, you know, we've had to make changes and we've had to make savings just like every other department has had to, although we have thought through this really carefully, and Mel's here and will speak about it if she wants to about it, because, you know, it is something we are very reluctant to have to do. We have statutory obligations which we will maintain, but a lot of the wraparound services that aren't necessarily statutory obligations, we need to avoid spending more money in the long term on some of our residents if we can prevent them from getting into a situation where they need, say, full-time care. So I think working with the NHS as well, who are also concerned about their cost structures, the more closely we work together and align our services, the better. And I think this is something that the government has hinted that they want to happen as well. For us, as I've said publicly before, the worry is that it may not be quick enough because of the funding issues. But I do think we should be, we have a lot of monitoring going on constantly in our service of what's going on, and I do think that we should be comforted by that, and we, you know, rely on the fact that the mitigations are carefully thought through. Mel, did you want to add?
Thank you, Sarah. So go back to Andy Dingwall, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to challenge and agree with Councillor Wakefield within the space of 2 sentences. So the first challenge, you referenced transformation being done while the plane is in flight. That's completely normal. Every transformation in every business and every organisation is always that we don't stop business in order to transform. It's not unique to Somerset. It's not unique to the public sector. It's kind of the job. So we need to make sure we're all in that space when we're thinking about transformation. Where I agree though, so our public speaker, Mr. Orr, alluded to us putting the cart before the horse, and I think it's a bit of an understatement. My agreement with Councillor Wakefield is that there is an opportunity here. I don't see it being taken in these papers at the moment. So we appear to be trying to provide the same volume of services, but at lower service levels, rather than focusing on a smaller number of services that we can do really well. So in case I'm being a bit unfair there, I want to ask a direct question to Councillor Wilkins. Given the changes we're making, given the service changes that we're making across both waste and transport, what's the area that you're most concerned about within transport and waste, and what are we doing to mitigate that?
So the cart before the horse is in an in-flight operation. I'm struggling with the mixed metaphors there, but I think we've got the gist. Councillor Wilkins.
Pegasus, it's called.
Yeah, I mean, on your metaphors, you know, Somerset did not choose transformation. It was thrust upon us you know, when asked the question, Somerset rejected transformation quite clearly. As for you know, my concerns, yeah, obviously, any reduction in personnel is always difficult. My major concerns have been answered in relation to the highways superintendents that have been put back into the scheme, which was my highest concern. Yeah, there's still parts that I'm less comfortable with. However, we are where we are. I think that we'll have to watch the waste side of things very carefully and make sure we do focus on the most vulnerable people. And so obviously we'll be watching these changes going forward. But we are very much sort of moving forward. We've had to make these changes, and we'll see where we have to put up our personnel to make sure that everything is mitigated as best as possible. Obviously, it's difficult, but I'm pretty happy with the alterations that we've made. Scrutiny has been very useful in that. The executive have made some interesting points and have taken on board suggestions and alterations. So it's been a very useful experience, I think, to go through this process. It's a useful process, I think, is the word I'm looking for. And of course, we will look to adjust as we move forward.
Thank you. And Sarah Wakefield.
Yeah, just wanted to reply back about your comment about my in-flight suggestion. I think that when it comes to business, no company would be formed of 5 companies on one day with a new IT system starting on that day as well. You just wouldn't do that in business. I'm sorry, that is a mad thing to do. We were forced to do it by the government making that decision on our behalf. And we've made the best of it. What you need is a much longer run in to a unitary council where people can get themselves ready for it, where everybody agrees. I think possibly that happened in Dorset, I'm not sure, but I think it happened in a different way. But you know, just to answer that, you might do, yeah, you'll have to do transformation in a company while it's still going, but you would not put 5 companies into one body on the same day and have a new IT system starting as well. You just wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I'm speaking to other council leaders. I'm starting like every marriage, every LGR proposal is unique to itself. I've got Theo, and then I'll go back to Andy.
Yeah, just a quick response to one of the points that Andy made about Somerset Council delivering fewer services. We have to remember that, over the course of the wider transformation programme and transition programme since the creation of Somerset Council and moving on, there are areas where we are stepping out of the space. One example, of course, is in terms of theatres, which is something that we're not going to be running anymore. We're handing over the Octagon project to Yeovil. That is what we are working on. I spent part of this weekend meeting with market traders in Frome because we're looking at the possibility, and the leaders got to make the final decision in the next few weeks, of handing over the market services to the city, town and parish councils. But if there are other areas where Councillor Dingwall would like to suggest that Somerset Council stop providing services, particularly if he can find alternative ways of those being provided by another organisation. I'm all ears for how we can do that, because that is the sort of thing we do need to be looking at over the next few years.
Okay, Andy, briefly, please.
I was going to be really petty. I'm going to withdraw my request to speak.
Thank you for avoiding pettiness. Thank you. And Diego.
Thank you, Chair. I'll also avoid pettiness for you. Just one really quick one though, just on Councillor Wakeford's, one of the points she made earlier on around savings having to be made as part of unitary. Just to clarify, as far as I know, I could be wrong, but the savings that were part of the business case for unitary are separate to what we see before us. And as I understand it, much of the £18 million per annum savings is being achieved or in progress to be achieved as part of that business case for unitary. Just want to put that out there.
Can we just get a response on that point first? Because this is a question that I've been asking separately. I don't know whether Mr. Jones wants to respond on that one.
Happily, Chair, thank you. So I'll respond in general terms. In essence, we had a transition programme that was on track to deliver in excess of 18.5 million. From memory, that was 20.4 million. However, that programme simply wasn't sufficient, and that was the discussion and ultimately the decision at executive early in January 2024, whereby the programme was reset and extended to go beyond those savings. So there are a range of different savings that have been enabled by the local government reorganisation, from the compilation of contracts, the facilitation of single IT systems, but in addition, the workforce savings that we had delivered as a result of the senior level senior management restructuring was then extended to go much further than first envisaged. And we also then extended that into the staff cohort, resulting in the £34 million of savings that you're seeing today.
Yeah. So to be clear, there are LGR savings included within this paper.
In essence, Chair, the savings that were set out as part of the workforce savings that are set out of LGR have effectively been incorporated and enhanced and developed further, much further, as part of this report.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that point, because it's really important to understand that that's been incorporated into this and it's not a separate process as you suggested.
Thank you, Chair. So going back to this report then, there are a number of impacts that have no mitigating actions within it. I want to just look at the service impacts for finance and procurement, which I think is page 66 of the report. The council hasn't been quick enough on a number of fronts, and we hear that over and over again, whether that's on planning, enforcement, or even dealing with customer queries. For example, last week, the auditors said that the council's not moved quickly enough to develop a pipeline of saving plans. There's just one example. And our previous Section 151 officer also said to us that the council was moving too slowly. I worry, looking through this paper, that we're learning very little from what our auditors are saying, because many of the changes proposed will mean slower service, and it will impact the partners that we work with and the hundreds of businesses that we do business with. So on finance and procurement, I'll give you just a couple of examples on there. You've got a potential drop in prompt payment percentages for both local suppliers and standard payments. To me, that says this council is setting itself up for a battle with the Small Business Commissioner who tackles late payments. Later payments, as we know, will mean smaller business will be negatively affected, many of whom have very little cash in the bank. And there's nothing in this paper that gives an impact assessment on the businesses, on our partners that will be affected by that particular decision. Look at processing times for invoices, where it says the invoices, contracts and instalments are likely to take longer. Again, this will impact our partners. And it says it will impact adults and children's. Can we afford to self-inflict further pressure on adults and children's services? Because that is what this will do. And then there's also stated in there about the procurement process that no procurement involvement for spends below £100,000. What are the checks and balances there? I don't see them anywhere within this report, but I may have missed it, or it may be coming to a future meeting. And I'm concerned again that smaller Somerset businesses risk losing out. Much of what we see here in especially this finance procurement part will impact the partners that we work with, and I don't see any fair recognition or impact assessment of these changes on them or on us as a council, because no doubt much of this will backfire on us. So I'd appreciate a direct response from Councillor Lation and her message to business.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got four answers. I'll see how they go. So the audit report that we heard at Audit Committee last year was the external auditors annual report for 23-24. So the second part of that answer is that we've not yet seen any of the progress reports leading from the auditor's annual report, and that's the bit I'm looking forward to. So the work that Sian Kenny has been doing through IdeaGen, where we get a really clear progress report, and we've had the one for 22-23 right the way through the calendar year 24. And now what we need to do is to make sure that where we've not got to 100% on every part of the external auditor's recommendations, so those were key recommendations and improvement recommendations for 22-23, we need to make sure they roll into the progress report for 23-24, that anything that did not reach 100% is not forgotten. So that progress report, I did suggest at, I think, scrutiny, too many meetings at the minute, I'm afraid, Chair. I did suggest that although that is a report for audit, that it would also be an extremely useful report for corporate and resources scrutiny to see as well. On the prompt payments, I would be the first to tell you that I received a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls and a lot of messages soon after the move to Microsoft Dynamics. That number has reduced hugely. And I always take that as a personal indicator that when there are concerns from local companies and from people who are caring for others, that I hear very quickly if they're running into trouble because they're not getting their payments. And I would be the first to accept that I did have a lot of those messages after vesting day, but that the number has reduced now. So, but I'm very happy to look into that. And as I've suggested, working with the chairs and vice chairs of all the scrutiny committees on how we put together our corporate performance monitoring reports. So I would suggest anything that's giving members concern anywhere in the council, please make sure it gets to those scrutiny chairs, because a meeting is being set up. Not a formal meeting of scrutiny. This will be an informal meeting at which chairs and vice chairs and I will discuss, and perhaps leader of council, if he's not too tied up on devolution or anything else, we can literally discuss in an informal setting what we would like to see on performance reporting. I think that's really important. And on the procurement, so we agreed that at full council in 2024. That is what I call the post-Brexit procurement. And I'm told by Paul Skews that although there are some concerns that government won't be ready for that to be implemented in February, that it is going ahead on that date. And so my point on that is the move from 50,000 to 100,000. If you look at the costs of goods, you look at the costs of services, particularly things like construction, highways work, actually you could quite well argue that the 100,000 is the new 50,000. So I take your point that all of these things need monitoring, and the performance bit in my job title is where I want to be sure that we do that. And I would really appreciate anything that you can contribute there, please. Thank you.
Brief response, Diogo.
Yeah, just one bit, I don't think it was responded to, but it may not be councillor Lation, just around the processing times for invoices, which it says the impact will be all services, including adults and children's, and whether that's us self-inflicting more damage on adults and children's, really. Just anyone's view on that, please.
Thank you. I'll rely on my colleagues to let me know if we're not doing well enough, and I'm sure they will. But I do understand your concern. It's a very valid concern. Thank you.
Indeed, and the cash flow point is well made. It's one of the reasons we brought in the 7-day processing for local suppliers, and we will be watching that data very carefully in our performance indicator report. It's a well made point. Okay, I've got nobody else indicating. Oh, Councillor Chilcott, hello. Good morning, Mandy.
Good morning. My first question, please, is around children's. So, in the light of continuing ombudsman concern and complaints of repeated maladministration that have been upheld, what assurance can we be given that the education teams in place now and after the restructure have the capacity, knowledge and skills in place to address this past maladministration identified by the Ombudsman and ensure that in future the level of complaints to the Ombudsman is very markedly reduced? And I note that actually a number of them are being upheld currently. So just that reassurance that what we're seeing here is going to help that and not vice versa. That's my first question.
Thank you, Mandy. I appreciate that. And you're going to draw out of me some of the things I was going to say in item 11 around the ombudsman and complaints report that happens there. Just want to say, and I'll bring Claire in for some of the detail, but the situation that we're currently in is certainly not lost on the service. The service has been working incredibly hard to build working relationships and work well with our LGO, the LG SCO colleagues to keep them abreast of our plans. I pointed you towards the Appendix C and C triple three, which is where, and I said it's our opportunity. The restructuring we're wanting to put in from the 1st of April is intended to actually improve our delivery of statutory SEND services and to stitch together far more effectively the work that we have to do on inclusion, ensuring schools are working collaboratively with us and keeping schools, if you like, as or keeping children education as part of our protective factor. But it's the restructuring that's most important. We're trying to find a way of making sure that we deliver our services more effectively so that we prevent any complaints going beyond, apart from 1 or 2, going beyond stage 1 to stage 2 and then to LGO. Nobody thinks this is anyone's finest hour on our LGO numbers in terms of what's being upheld, and there's lots of reasons for that, but we're working incredibly hard to fix that. And I think the restructure is part of it. I'll pass to Claire if there's more detail you'd like to put to that one.
So I think what we've realised in terms of restructuring, in terms of the education restructure, although some of the principles of it are that we need to have staff who know their children better. So we have a system at the moment where everybody is working with a large number of children, and that means that people do not necessarily know the children that they're working with very well, and crises tend to come to the fore. So when there's a crisis, we deal with it, and other things then get dropped below it. What we think we need to do, which is why we're working on moving into locality bases, is having locality areas where staff are in those locality areas wrapped around schools. They will get to know the issues for schools early and the issues for children early. So they will provide the support at an earlier point. They will get to know those children and follow them on their journey through that SEND system. And there will be a multi-agency team working in that area who will support effectively around for those individual children. We think that will be better and will prevent a lot of these issues escalating up through the system, because people will have accountability for those individual groups of children, individuals and groups of children, that they know well. And that will mean that we, as I say, intervene earlier and better, and things will not escalate through the system in the way they are currently. We're also putting in a post which will be a sort of a middle senior management post that is specifically responsible for mediation and complaints. So somebody will have an overview specifically on anything that relates to a complaint or mediation, and we'll be pulling information from those locality areas to make sure those things are being dealt with on a very regular basis. So I feel more confident that that is right. in terms of the way to go forward. We have not done well, and I publicly apologise to all the families that have suffered from the poor way that we've managed this system. There are 2 ombudsman complaints that have been upheld that need to come to executive, that we're looking at a date for in the next month or so to be able to explain what went wrong and to explain why that won't happen in the future.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Thank you, Claire. Mandy?
Thank you hugely for that response, and I think anything that can be done, what I wanted, the reassurance was really that what we're seeing in this paper will help improve that situation. And I think you said there's a new programme in April, which is very much welcome as well. So thank you for that. My second question is a generic one, and one that I've talked about probably ad nauseum, in that the future shape of the council has been shaped by the programme and which staff are staying and those that are going, and councillors have had very little say in which services will remain and which will be potentially reduced. So there's a couple here. Firstly, there's a lot of risks outlined in the paper. It's really difficult to capture those. So my next question is, is there a risk register that sits behind this? My guess is that there is, but also I think there's probably a lot not in this paper that will arise as we work through the next 12 months. So is there an active risk register, and are these all being sort of given the risk numbers? That's my next question.
I'll start maybe and then hand over to Alan J. I'd say the risk register that sits behind this is the risk register for the entire council, because our council is our people. And so I don't think that we can say that this transformation programme has a separate risk register. For me, the risk register and the strategic risk register, I'm looking at Sarah Cretney now, I believe we will be seeing a new strategic risk register coming forward quite soon. At the next, so at the next, except where are we now? February. So the first Monday in March it will be. So and I think I do agree with you, Councillor Chilcott, Mandy, that this is an area where now that we have IdeaGen bedded in and working well for us, and we have those progress reports for the annual auditor report, we need to tie it all together so that we are kind of all on that same page. Although I do appreciate that risk, performance, they're different. They are manifested differently, they are viewed differently, but they are all part of how you make a success of a council that needs to transform, firstly because of LGR, and then secondly because of the financial emergency. And I would just make the point that the work we're doing now, I'm absolutely certain we will be getting, and probably already are, getting phone calls, emails from other councils. And what came over from the government about LGR forming part of devolution, regional devolution, I think is going to have some councils, some not very far away from us, really quite concerned about what lies almost immediately ahead of them. And that will put us, I don't like to say this because I certainly don't want to sound overconfident, but it puts us in a position where we are a bit ahead of some of the other counties in England who have now got a mammoth piece of work ahead of them. We've got a large piece of work, huge even, but theirs is even bigger because they're going to be looking at regional devolution at the same as LGR and going from, in places there'll be 4 levels, won't they? If they're looking at regional devolution, county, district and parish level. So they will be going to what we're hoping to go to, which will be 3 levels. It is a really demanding time for local government, and although interest rates may have steadied a bit, inflation has come down. We're not in deflation. We're still working on figures that are much higher than they were when the Secretary of State first talked about LGR for Somerset. And by the time we got to vesting day, it was a very, very different picture. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I've just come to my specifics. Thanks for that, and I do agree. I think I cannot imagine how it'll be if you're thrust into it at very, very short notice, because we know the work that goes on behind the scenes. My questions there, I suppose my particular questions around risks are: the first one, the reference to health and safety, which is on page 57. I am concerned to read that, you know, we could, if the staff capacity isn't there, you know, ultimately end up closing buildings if our health and safety work isn't done. And I think for health and safety work for me is absolutely core. It's important for not our buildings but our staff. So I really have concerns any reduction in health and safety. My second area that I would just like to highlight is securing 106. There's a reduced capacity. And I think that fits in with our devolving or moving services to our towns and parishes, because a lot of them rely on 106 to make those really localised improvements. And you could be talking very, very large figures. So I think that potentially could lose us more than we save. I will probably leave it there, actually. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I just thought I'd pick up on the section 106 point. It's a really important piece of our work, that, because it's a large part in many parts of the county about how we deliver infrastructure. I'm acutely aware of that, and we keep a very tight rein on that. And some members local to this building, I'm looking to my right towards Councillor Smith-Roberts, might recall that when we picked up control of Somerset West and Taunton Council in 2019, the transformation programme that had been put in place there failed to acknowledge the existence of section 106, fell between the gaps. We ended up as a council having to give some money back to developers, and nothing hurts more than that. So having experienced that, having inherited that situation from the previous Taunton Deane Borough Council, I will make absolutely certain that nothing like that happens again.
Thank you. It wasn't returning it. It was the fact that the conversations hadn't gone on in the first place, so it wasn't there to be collected, which is probably a slightly different dynamic. And but it is 106. It's important for our school builds, for highways improvements, but also, as I said, those really localised, putting a bench in a park or play equipment, etc. They're absolutely essential. And as I said, the risk is by reducing capacity, you reduce the potential to bring that money in, and we should be about bringing the maximum in that we can to Somerset and not missing opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just if I may comment on the matters Councillor Chilcott raised regarding health and safety matters. So members of Audit Committee will note that we, at our request, set out a cultural review of health and safety matters across the council in order to ensure that on vesting day we understood the cultures that were inherited and the steps that need to be taken to develop that culture into something that was more appropriate for the scale and size and nature of our operations. That audit has completed, and the work that's ongoing then looks at how we can then ensure that all health and safety practices are improved across the organisation. So whilst the issues that are listed here in particular relate to facilities management and compliance, we've taken significant steps to reduce the administrative burden that health and safety matters often place upon staff, so they can focus on key issues. So members will be aware of things like our health and safety app, our regular reporting. So we've tried to ensure that as part of this process, we make it as easy as possible for staff to focus on the issue in hand rather than the reporting processes that are there. It also then means that we're able to track the types of risks that are being flagged here and report those to members through the right processes, particularly HR committee. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to the comments already made. The corporate health and safety team will actually sit within the HR and OD portfolio. And just to reassure members, we have reinvested into the corporate health and safety team, led by a new post, which will be a head of health and safety. And the total size of the team has doubled from a year ago to 16 posts. So just to reassure that we haven't diminished, if anything, we've reinvested money elsewhere from within the workforce service to ensure that we've got a sufficient and sustainable corporate health and safety function. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dawn. Okay. Just scanning the room for it online for any final comments before we move to the recommendation. So just catch up with my notes. So I'll just to remind colleagues that the structure report today is looking for executive endorsement and sponsorship ahead of being debated at full council next Wednesday. This is not for the executive to approve, other than empowering service directors to subsequently revise service standards after chief executive has agreed the final structure following full council endorsement. So the recommendations before us are to review the organisational structure proposals and potential impacts on staff, services and the budget, including proposed mitigating activities, endorse and recommend the organisational structure proposals as part of the Head of Trade Services report to full council, and agree where any proposed changes to service delivery as a result of the organisation structure proposals will impact on existing approved service standards, to delegate authority to the relevant service director and to revise the service standards, and also complete a review of any impacted plans and policies in consultation with their executive lead member before the end of May 2025. These are set out in Appendix B. Can I have a proposal for this? Councillor Theobald Philip. Can I have a second of Councillor Richard Wilkins? Those in favour, please show. Those against? That's clearly carried. And we move on to item 7, which is budget 25-26, savings, pressures, fees and charges. And can I just refer you that update C on fees and charges, agenda supplement 5 has been updated. Can I introduce Councillor Liz Lishon to introduce, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the paper today forms part of our budget setting for 2025-26, and I feel I must both explain and apologise for the fact that we're seeing the papers in this phased format. So as we're waiting for Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government to announce the final settlement, and also to respond to our submission for exceptional financial support, we are taking these papers as they are ready for consideration, and we have already added further meetings during February to enable that budget and council tax setting. Back in December, we had the paper with just under £44 million of savings, which included the pay bill reduction associated with the restructure. And we also had the revision of the council tax reduction scheme. Last week at the Audit Committee, the Treasury Management Strategy and Policy, the flexible use of capital receipts and the minimum revenue policy were considered. They will come forward to Executive and to full council through February. So at this meeting today, we have further budget savings of just over 2.9 million in Appendix A. We have budget growth proposals of 57.642 million in Appendix B, and we've had that referred to already by Councillor Mansell when we were talking about planning and enforcement. And then we have, as the leader has already mentioned, the proposed fees and charges set out in Appendix C, which has been superseded by a new version published on our website and made available to executive members on Friday evening last week. So all the papers will be included in the full suite of papers that will go to the extraordinary corporate and resources scrutiny on the 17th of February, to the extraordinary executive on the 19th of February, and then on to full council on the 26th of February. In the meantime, we await the Minister's statement, and we hope very much it will be this week. We know that we have a number of factors to consider as we move forward with council tax and budget setting. So we have more savings being worked up across the council, and they will come forward on the 17th of February for scrutiny and then the 19th for executive if they are considered robust. So we await the aforementioned final settlement, and we trust that the increased number of councils requesting exceptional financial support will have helped the Minister's understanding of how serious the current situation is for so many councils, particularly those with social care, SEND, special educational needs and disabilities, and housing and homelessness responsibilities. Last year, a further 5 million was awarded around this time of year, and the increases that we've seen from the budget in employers' national insurance, the drop of the threshold and the increased national living wage, whilst we welcome that, make that even more vital this year. We await confirmation of the capitalisation directive we submitted for the current financial year and our submission for the next year, 25-26. As we move towards the end of this financial year, we now have a good indication on sale of assets that will allow us to use that income from capital rather than taking out further borrowing. We also await the Minister's consideration of council tax increase above the referendum limit of 4.99%, as do other councils. We understand the impact of increasing council tax on households at this time, whether it is at the referendum limit or anywhere else, and we are committed to every mitigation possible should one of our proposed options be agreed. We will also consider our reserves, both our general fund and our earmarked reserves. Depending on the outturn for this year, 24-25, and the amount of capitalisation direction we are granted, our reserves may be better protected for the future, and that will always be a hugely important consideration for us as an administration. I'd like to hand over, if I may, to Maria Christofi, our 151 officer, and perhaps also to Nicola Hicks for some more detail on these papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to bring to members' attention in terms of this report our position, paragraph 5 that's on page 132 and 136. As Councillor Lation has already said, we are in discussions with MHCLG, and for clarity, given our financial position, without government support, we've been in a position where I would have no alternative but to issue a Section 114 notice. We are currently working on a number of other savings proposals across the piece. And I am hopeful that we'll be able to bring them forward as part of the final papers. But I think it's important to emphasise that given that we have declared a financial emergency in November 2023, we have exceptional financial support as well as earmarked reserves and other one-offs within the budget for 24-25. In order to set a balanced budget for 25-26, we will need that additional support.
The only bit I wanted to add is you mentioned Appendix C being the supplement, and just wanted to draw members' attention to, if you actually look at that supplement paper, the changes we have highlighted in green make it easy for the reader, and that's following a couple of points that we picked up in terms of a couple of errors that were in the original document, but also feedback from discussion at scrutiny in relation to some of the fees that were posed to be charged, but nothing further to add.
Thank you. Just want to draw attention of, we're just checking that Councillor Pugsley is not online. No, it's not. Draw attention to the recommendations or comments from the Corporate and Resources Scrutiny Committee, that they unanimously voted in favour of endorsing the recommendations and wished the executive to note their understanding and support of the three principles behind this decision on service funding. On the HRA rent settings, are we on? Is that part of this agenda? No, it's the next bit, so we don't need to go do that. That's fine. Okay, so we just got that bit on item 7 there. So I've got Federica Smith-Roberts first.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to provide an update on the fees and charges paper and a small amendment that is needed that's come forward after discussions between our Service Director, Sarah Dowden, and Minehead Sailing Club. So you'll see, I want to say it's on page 2, highlighted in green, the new charge that has come in at £400 for use of the slipway for the purpose of launching unmotorised vessels. What that does mean is that I think it's like 5 or 6 further down, that one needs to come out where it says the annual kayak paddleboard launch per kayak paddleboard, just because it's being replaced by that new one that has been listed in there.
This may sound ridiculous, but because there's a weekly kayak paddleboard launch, does that mean that the sailing club might suddenly get lots and lots of new members?
Me to come back, I would hope that people look to join Minehead Sailing and Water Sports Club, because obviously there is that benefit for those that are members by having that annual launch fee, and obviously all the benefits that come from using the water.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other comments or questions on item 7 from lead members or associates? Not seeing anybody, so I think I saw Lucy Trimnell first.
Thank you, Chair. So again, corporate and resources, this is the difficulty in being on the committee, then following it here, then following it to full council. I may sometimes sound like I'm repeating myself, but I asked a question about capitalisation directives. And I asked, sorry, I'm a bit wheezy today, and I asked about whether we knew what the ongoing impact of that would be. So I've been, and I was told that we didn't really know. And I suppose what I've been thinking about is that if we're selling these properties in order to fund our spending, will we still owe money on some of those properties, or do we initially pay off any loans before taking what's left to fund our day-to-day spending? Thank you.
Chair, this is a really complicated. I'm not going to give a complicated answer. It's a question that requires a really complicated answer. And the Property and Investment Executive Subcommittee deferred a paper at the recent meeting in this room. I'm sure colleagues will remember that. When that paper comes forward, which will be a confidential paper, but it will be available obviously to all members, there will be more information in there. I would also refer to the Treasury management papers that went to audit last week. So I do understand that there are a huge number of papers that make up the suite of budget and council tax setting, but they all need to be read together in order to make sense. And we are in a particular situation which may not have been the case for councils in the past, but will, as far as I can see, become more usual for councils in the future, where capitalisation directives are funded by sale of assets rather than additional borrowing. But that will depend on what councils are holding. So I think, Chair, if I may, I think I should defer the long answer to that to the next Property and Investment Subcommittee and that paper that was deferred last Tuesday, if I may, please.
Okay, thank you, Liz. I've got Mandy Chilcott next. Mandy.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the paper. That kind of comments I made within scrutiny, this isn't really a budget paper, and I have huge concerns. We are in February, which is normally our budget setting month. We're now pushing forward potentially into March with a fallback date. Yet here we are sat, and we still haven't had that exceptional financial support agreed for the budget we're approaching the end of. So we haven't heard about this current year's. We've put in a request, we're not sure how much for what it says for next year. So 2 questions. Given those 2 pressures, is it possible to set a budget this year? And what if we don't hear in time? And secondly, we effectively overspent what we had, and by using our reserves and selling some assets, that's how we are managing to produce the budget for this year. If we move that forward to next year, can we set that budget? And could there be an impact if we move into March actual collection? I'm not sure when we start billing, but it feels very, very close. So I haven't heard anything about that impact. So that's my first question.
I think Maria's really keen to answer that one.
So in my introduction, I made it clear that we need exceptional financial support from government in order to be able to set a balanced budget for 25-26. You're quite right. We haven't had the we've had an agreement in principle for the 24-25 exceptional financial support, and normally the confirmation comes towards the end of the financial year. We are liaising with MHCLG representatives to understand how that process will continue to work, and we are working with them regarding their timescales for when they can let us know as to whether we have been accepted for exceptional financial support, how much, etc. And until then, we can't set a balanced budget until we have that confirmation. I've made that as clear as I can in my introduction and in paragraph 5 of this report and in paragraph 22. We need government to let us know what the exceptional financial support that they are willing to offer us as a council, so that I can assess whether we can set a balanced budget for 25-26. I am hopeful that government will come forward. We understand that there are lots of councils that are in we had 19 councils in the current financial year that are in exceptional financial support. My understanding is that there are more councils that find themselves in financially challenging situation. This is a challenging time for all of us in local government, and we are just navigating through the processes as we see them before us. So I'm hopeful that government will be getting back to us, and we will structure our meetings so that we can respond and set the balanced budget at that point.
Thank you. So you're hoping they'll get back with both as opposed to one, but the current year's one is probably the most critical in a way.
Okay. That's my request of them, and I hope that they can.
Thank you. So my next question is around to set a truly balanced budget and be sustainable, which is the aim of this council. The hope is that they'll be allowed that additional increase in council tax. Is there a figure at which you could increase it by percentage wise that would actually get us back to be setting a fully balanced budget?
So currently we are working on a number of different proposals, as I've said, in terms of savings proposals and assumptions that are within the medium-term financial strategy. So the numbers keep changing behind the scenes at the moment, so I can't confirm a number to you today, but it will be available within the budget papers that go to the next executive meeting in February. And you're quite right, in order to set a sustainable balanced budget, it's about removing the one-offs from the budget and having sustainable income for sustainable expenditure. And that's what we're working to. So the one-offs that are in the current in-year budget of 81 million, a combination of the exceptional financial support capitalisation directive, the earmark reserves provision that has been made, but also the one-offs in terms of surplus from the collection fund. Those are quite significant to remove in 1 year. So when you have any one-offs, you have to deal with it in the following financial year. So my hope is that we can find further savings that are robust enough to go into the budget. If they're not, they will need to come forward during the financial year, but they need to be robust enough for me to let them into the budget. So we have certainty that they can be delivered, and that we have, whatever the final settlement may bring. As last year there was some additional money in the final settlement, I remain hopeful that there may be something additional. We still haven't had all grants confirmed, so we're just waiting on all of that at the moment. And of course the outcome of the exceptional financial support request that we put into government. So once we have all of that, a balanced budget, if government are minded to support our exceptional financial support request, a balanced budget will be able to be set. However, I will be clear about how much is one-off and how much is ongoing, and then what that does mean to future years' budget in terms of the 2026-27 gap, and what that will mean in terms of how much we will need to find in order to close that gap.
Thank you, so really clear. If we heard something we might or we might not have a whole new load of proposals before us in the next few weeks.
Officers are working really hard behind the scenes, working on savings. I would expect the whole savings programme to continue. We are, of course, considering new transformation. There have been all sorts of successes in transformation so far. We've had the workforce one presented here today. We've also had the My Life, My Future throughout this financial year in adult social care. Officers are working extremely hard behind the scenes to continue finding savings. You've got fees and charges increases before you, and I am asking to see that we move as many of them into a robust position that I can assess, and then if they are robust, we'll bring them back to executive through scrutiny for the budget setting.
I look forward to hearing more.
I feel I should just add, Chair, that of course print deadlines and Royal Mail deadlines come into this too. So although councils have till the 11th of March to get council tax bills printed and out to every household, is a significant piece of work, and that bit might not have changed in the last few decades, but I suspect actually the length of time it takes to get all those bills out to households probably longer now than it was 20, 30 years ago, simply because of pressures on the Royal Mail.
Real concern that we're going to have homes in Somerset getting a very, very late bill, or possibly not even getting it, depending on the post, and they could be faced with a substantial increase, of which we're not sure. I think in budgeting terms for families, it's a real challenge. Thank you.
Yeah, your points are well made, and I think it underlines the importance of a multi-year settlement and a long-term solution for social care coming forwards from government. And we've been assured that both will be on the way at some point, just as Mr. Simon Hall, when he was the minister, assured me we would have a capitalisation direction letter, and I'm still waiting, though he's not in that role anymore. Diogo.
Thank you, Chair. I've got general comment and then two questions as well. So just to echo really Councillor Chilcott's words, and it really is, when I've looked at this, and I'm new to this role, so, you know, do forgive me. Generally speaking, I don't see a budget proposal. I think so far really, everything's being left late. All we know is that there's still a huge budget gap and we're waiting a little bit longer, moving a little bit slower. But I appreciate partly down to government being slow in response as well, I think. But what we still don't know is the specifics, the numbers that this council has asked the government for. You know, recent news, for example, have they followed the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead in wanting a 20-25% council tax increase this year? We don't know the specifics. And I think for us as councillors, we get asked questions on the ground by our residents when they see this news about councils across the country doing X, Y, Z. And it's just really difficult for us to give a response when we don't know very much, apart from that there's nothing much to say, we wait and see. But having specifics is always really helpful when trying to engage. I don't know if you want to come back. That's just general comment. You don't have to come back to that, but
You said partly the responsibility of government. I would say entirely. I think is the situation that we're in. It is a challenging position to be able to set a budget when we are getting information through this late, as I think Maria Christofi has outlined very eloquently, that's the position that we find ourselves. It's not a position we'd like to be in, but as I said, we look forward to that multi-year settlement we've been promised.
So two questions then. I'll ask my first one. The first one's around devolution and the on the paper Appendix A savings proposals. And I'm going to repeat, Lucy, we've mentioned this at corporate, so apologise for mentioning it again, but no doubt you'll give the same answer and that's fine. On devolution, you've got some figures there, which isn't a total reflection of the total value of devolution given to each town and parish, and that's understandable because it's not in that particular budget line. And what we need clarity on, and I'm sure it will come later on, perhaps in a separate paper, is what's been devolved to which council. And I think we need some clarity whether the devolution of assets and services have been forced upon councils, because I sit on Bridgewater Town Council and they will say they've had to pick up X, Y, Z, otherwise Somerset Council is going to cut it all. That's the arguments that's been put rightly or wrongly. They've also said that they haven't been given the correct figures for the assets and services, but Chris Hall has responded previously and I'm sure he'll want to respond again. And so just on that, and then obviously, will the paper come forward with clarity on devolution? I know Councillor Lation said it previously, but she may want to repeat again at this committee.
Oh, we've got a race to the mic. Oh, Liz, one out by short head.
I just wanted to say that at scrutiny, I think it was last week, I suggested that it might be something scrutiny would like to recommend would be that this council writes to every parish in Somerset and actually lists which councils have taken which services and assets, so that we have a chance to thank them very much for their capable and ambitious work, and to give some kind of assurance to those who have not yet come forward that the programme is still open, local devolution. And I can assure you, having sat in asset management group meetings, that there has been different approaches from different councils, and there have been bespoke arrangements, and they have varied quite considerably, and that has been absolutely fine because that was the commitment we gave at the beginning of the process. Thank you.
Chris. Yeah, thank you. And my recollection was that the corporate resources scrutiny added into their forward agenda a paper that would set out the exact cost of each individual devolution package to each location. So you'll be able to see the totality by city, town or parish. So I think that paper will give you the answers that you're seeking. In terms of whether these are being forced or otherwise, all of this has been done in conjunction with the city, town or parishes. Many of these items are things that have been a long-standing frustration for those city, town or parishes where they've wanted to gain control of that service or asset. The only example where we have said we are going to stop the service was around CCTV. That went through as part of a budget paper last year. We said we're going to turn CCTV services off. A number of city, town and parishes came forward and said, we're happy to pay for the service if you keep it in place. And that's the situation we're in today. So CCTV was never devolved, but we are receiving income equivalent to the cost of operating that service from a range of city, towns and parishes. The challenge around whether the figures are correct, the figures that we give are the figures on the basis of our operation. If city, town or parishes choose to deviate from our operation to enhance services, then it will cost them more to do so. So obviously when they run those services, they are in complete control as to the standard and quality that they give. So if they choose to deviate from what we were doing, it may cost them more, it may cost them less. But we've provided the best figures that we have available to us based upon our costs of operation.
Thank you. Just to highlight that service and asset devolution isn't something that's new. In a previous role as chair of North Petherton Town Council, we took on from Somerset County Council a car park, a library and a youth club, and from Sedgemoor District Council, toilets, playing fields and dog bins. We said no to CCTV. This isn't a new process. It's been going on for some considerable time. It obviously accelerated at this, and at no point has any city, town or parish council been forced to take anything on. Diogo.
Thank you, Chair, for the clarification. So my last question is around fees and charges. And again, it was picked up by, I think, Councillor Will Wren, so I didn't ask then because he'd asked it, but I will raise it at this meeting. So at the last full council, I think both Conservatives and Lib Dems, we kind of spoke in support of the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. Some Lib Dems, or I think everyone that did spoke very passionately about their concern with the reduction in business rate relief for the sectors, but just recognise it's something that we had to do as a matter of process. I believed them then, but I'm not sure I believe them now, and I'll tell you why, and you'll be able to respond. So in the fees and charges, you're proposing to increase the pavement licence renewal. This year, it's £142. It's going to go up to £340. That's an extra £194 for cafes, with a few tables and chairs outside their premises. I don't know how cafes will cope, and I'll give you one example, which many of you will no doubt be aware of. The Nutmeg Cafe in Bridgewater. They say that they're losing £500 a week in trade because of the roadworks on going outside their premises. This council will now tell them to pay an extra £194 to keep their tables and chairs outside. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And later on in your fees and charges, you can see that if you have a sex establishment, that this council will give you a discount to operate. You can renew your licence for the discounted rate of £102 and you get a 35% discount. So my question to them is, will they reconsider those two specific proposals?
So the licensing service runs on a full cost recovery basis. The increase in the payment licenses is recognition that they cost more to administer now that we've done the full cost recovery calculation than they've done previously. So the increase, whilst it appears substantial on paper, it is relatively modest when spread across the entirety of the year. That's a decision for you as councillors to approve or otherwise, but this is the basis of full cost recovery. That is what it costs Somerset Council to administer that licence. In terms of the sex establishments, it's not a discount, it is full cost recovery. We've established that it costs less than we were previously charging, and we cannot create a surplus or a profit from licensable activity. And therefore, we are having to realign our fees and charges in accordance with what that service or function costs to administer.
I just wanted to come in on that because it brought back thoughts, and I think Heather's just put her hand up because as we became into the unitary authority, we spent a lot of time bringing the 4 areas together to look to do that alignment, and there were some interesting anomalies when it came to sex establishments as an example, because I remember that being a very long conversation that we had. So I think all of this is around the fact that the licensing service is working on that full cost recovery, and I guess every year we will see movements in those as we look to ensure that we are seeking full cost recovery in the service.
I'm intrigued about the long conversation about sex shop licensing, and I will look forward to learning more about that, but perhaps not in this meeting. Heather.
I promise my hand didn't go up because of the second part of your comparison, Diego. It was on the first. It's a point of clarification with me, because as I recall it, when I was at Mendip, having had the licensing function under my portfolio, there was, during COVID, the government brought out a fast track, cheaper version of getting pavement licenses that took it down to about 150 quid. It was really very hard for us to actually administer, because it was done really quickly. And to be honest, it was nowhere near cost recovery, but it was an idea to try and enable those businesses coming back, to allow them to have some safe trading and so on. So when I saw that uplift, I didn't fall over it when I saw it I've seen this list for a while, because I was thinking this felt like a regularization back to what it actually costs to run pavement licenses, because I knew from the officers I spoke to how hard it was to deliver that service for that small amount of money. So it's a question of clarification, really, so whether my understanding on that one's right, Chris, that it was unfair. Because I think the full we were doing pavement licenses light in the districts. The full ones were about 400 or 500 quid, as I recall previously from the previous county.
Okay, and moving on. Oh, sorry, Chris, have you got another point?
Well, it was just to confirm that obviously government did change the rules on payment licensing back during COVID period. What I don't know, without going back to records, is whether the new charge reflects the old charge or how close to it is. So I think your question really was, are we going back to where we were before? And I'll have to come back to you.
Okay, that sounds like a sensible outcome. Diogo, do you want to come back on them?
Yeah, just really, really quickly. Is there then any exceptional hardship for businesses? Let's say, I don't know, but I'm genuinely really am concerned, particularly for Bridgewater. And I'm being a bit selfish here talking about Bridgewater, but I am. And it's not to knock the roadworks that are going on, because that's separate. But there are generally businesses in the sector who are really struggling because of the various impacts on their business. Nutmeg is just one example, who are losing £500 a week, and then they'll get this bill increased bill through their door, and they will say to them, is Somerset Council on our side or not? And that's genuine, because I speak to them. I'm in the sector myself. I completely understand it. And so I really worry about the message we send to that sector. And I just wonder, is there anything can be done, whether exceptional circumstance or whatever it is, to support those businesses that are really being affected?
If I can take this away, it partly doesn't necessarily completely fall on licensing. I think it's a kind of a cross-council approach, if I'm honest. I think Revs and Benefits would probably need to step in, and maybe even our capital programmes, just to see what it is when we do things that then build that in as well. So something for us to take away as a collective.
Thank you. And yeah, I would certainly echo some of those points about the issues that have been raised forward by hospitality in general, but also I'm aware of issues that impact in the Bridgewater area. So I've got Councillor Sue Osborne and Councillor Val Keach online. To go into Sue first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. Certainly last week at audit, it was brought to attention that the auditors had made 2 statutory recommendations covering PACE and savings. Those are reported to central government. What is the risk that could affect the outcome of the 2 exceptional capitalisation directives we're asking for? So one for this current financial year, one for next year. And that's my first question. And actually my second question has been covered very eloquently by my colleague Diego Rodriguez, because it's actually quite a substantial increase on those pavement licensing fees at a time as where we all know that hospitality is coming under pressure, and also the discretionary rate release for those businesses. I think it's the has also dropped as well, but I think that was imposed by Central rather than us. So if we could do something about that, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. I was slightly disturbed that Val Keach has appeared on our screen and Sue Osborne's voice came out, which was slightly disconcerting. And I'm I thought for a moment you're going to ask about sex shop licensing, which was even more disconcerting.
No,
Maria to come back.
I could just make the point first, as well as the annual auditor's report for 23-24. Of course, we had a SIPFA report on Somerset Council commissioned by MHCLG, and we also had the Corporate Peer Challenge. So I think government probably has had quite a bit of information about Somerset, but I'll gladly hand over to Maria. Thank you.
I think government are aware of our financial position, given that we applied for exceptional financial support in the current financial year 24-25, and it was made very clear that without financial support and without us moving to a sustainable balanced budget, that we would need further exceptional financial support from government. The statutory recommendation is actually looking back on 2023-24 financial year. It's not a reflection on 24-25. There will be a subsequent report that's written by the external auditors that will reflect on 24-25. However, their recommendation is all about developing detailed savings plans at pace to deliver savings targets as set out in the medium-term financial strategy in order to reduce reliance on one-off resources and rebase the council's budget to a financially sustainable level. And that aligns completely with what I'm saying as the council's Section 151 officer and what the previous Section 151 officer has said to the council, and how council officers and members have been working since November 2023, since the financial emergency was declared, to find ways of making savings and move to a financially sustainable position. Unfortunately, 81 million one-offs in the budget is a challenging position to move from at a time where we have significant pressures still in adult social care, children's social care. We still have the interest rates being higher in terms of borrowing costs, and also in the higher inflation is still baked into the contract costs that we see, albeit inflation being slightly lower in this financial year at the moment. It's important for us to recognise that we are in constant dialogue with government because we have exceptional financial support in 24-25. It's part of how we continue the conversations about the actions that we are taking as a council. And as the Deputy Leader has already said, there have been a number of reports that have been written and assessed about our position. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And I take you back to paragraph 5 within this report that says, without exceptional financial support, the council would be in a section 114 territory.
Thank you, Maria. Move on to Val Keach.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to the comment Councillor Rodriguez made at the very start. Something about Bridgewater Town Council saying that they are being forced or persuaded to take services. I remember a meeting, it must be 2.5 years ago, when I was the lead member, with Mr. Jones, David Clark was there, and members of Bridgewater Town Council. And the shopping list they gave us, I came to the conclusion, in fact, I made the comment at the time, it looked as though they were actually setting up a new district council. So I think, I think for them to now, for them to be saying they've been forced into taking things, I actually have to refute that, because their original shopping list was absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
It's just a comment.
Thank you, Val. I think that's noted. I think Diogo wants to come back.
Just as
I'm sure it won't be with the petty points.
No, it'll be very, very spot. Just as I've been named, I think I agree with Councillor Keach, and I think we had very early conversations as well, kind of separately, about Bridgewater's ambitions, which many of us felt were a bit too much, too soon, too ambitious, too quickly. So thank you for clarifying.
Okay, let's not get sucked down to that rabbit hole if we can. Righty ho. Have I got anybody else that I've missed out or wants to comment on this? I don't see any indications in the room. So we move on to the recommendations, please. And the recommendations are that the executive endorse the proposals below for approval by full council, additional budget savings for 25-26 of 2.918 million as set out in tables 1, 3 and appendix A, and budget growth proposals for 25-26 of 57.642 million, reducing to 57.719 million by 27-28 as set out in table 2 and appendix B, and the proposed changes to fees and charges for 25-26 as set out in appendix C as revised. I was about to say as amended, but it hasn't been amended, it's been revised. Okay, can I see a proposer for that? Councillor Liz Lysholm. Can I see a seconder? Councillor Graham Oakes. Those in favour, please, and those against. That's clearly carried. Okay, we move on to the housing revenue account rent setting and fees and charges for 25-26. And I'd like to invite Liz, but I think it's Federica. Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts to introduce the item and highlight any key points. Thank you, Fed.
Thank you, Chair. Bringing forward the rent setting and fees and charges in relation to the housing revenue account today. This again is, as you will see from the recommendations, has been split out from some of the other reports that will be brought forward as we move forward into the February different meetings that we are all looking to attend. Reasoning for this partly is that we need to be able to notify our tenants if we are looking to recommend this paper and make this decision today and on to full council, only because of the impact that this has in relation to needing to, one, rely on Royal Mail to let them know, but any delays does have an impact on our income because of the way that we do the weekly charges. So you'll see today before you lots of letters going from A, B, C, D and all the way through to G in relation to fees and charges, where we're putting our rents up by 2.7% on our dwellings, and then different amounts depending whether or not there are meeting halls or guest rooms. We are legislated in relation to what we can put rent up by. That is within the paper, and we're following that guidance. We do know that we are asking for the maximum that we're allowed to do when it comes to rents. We've seen in the past the impact that government diktat has had on us as a HRA when we weren't allowed to put it up, and therefore the impact that that does have further down the line. So we are recommending the maximum increase here today. This has gone through our different tenants boards. I've been at a Homes in Sedgemoor board where this has been discussed. And I also know, I believe that tenants in the West have also had the discussion as well at their meeting. There is some information here in relation to the lifeline and some changes that we are proposing. There will be an impact on some people, especially new people that are coming in. A lot of this has been down to the work that we put forward as we're bringing the two areas together and making sure that we're trying to align where we can. But I've got the brilliant Kerry and Simon here to answer any intricate questions that you have, but I'm proposing to put these forward today.
Thank you very much, Fed. And just to, I found all the scrutiny comments that I couldn't find earlier. Just to say that how the committee unanimously voted in favour of endorsing the recommendations. Just to feed that back. And Kerry and Simon, is there anything you wanted to add?
I think that's fine. If the scrutiny was supportive, which was really pleasing to see. And I think we do need to put these charges up, as Federica has said, to put forward the business plan for next year.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Fed's covered the majority of the aspects I was going to cover today, so thank you. Just to emphasise the fact that if we do approve the rents and service charges, that does contribute towards the council's ability to set a balanced budget for the HRA in 25-26. And also to help finance the new capital investment that we've got for 25-26 onwards as well. Just to also note that this is just the rents and service charges part of the report. We do have, following the next committee cycle, you'll have the annual revenue budget for 25-26. You'll also have the capital programme for 5 years, an update on the MTFP and an update on the 30-year business plan. So that is coming. We've just had to separate it as per the points that Federica has mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Liz.
I just wanted to confirm, if we could please, that the 2.7% is the most that we can go up. I think it's CPI plus 1%, and I think the CPI was from September, wasn't it? So, and it's a lower figure than last year. Last year was 7.7. So just to confirm those things, and to thank officers for bringing these papers forward, so that they'll go through hopefully a bit earlier, and that we can make sure that the billing is done in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hate to think what CPI might be next year. We have a trade war, but let's not unpick that one now. Councillor Wakefield.
Yes, I just wanted to welcome this and support it. I think this is the right thing to do, albeit that nobody wants to put things up, but we have to do that. I just wanted to ask a question which is sort of slightly out of this paper in a way. I did notice when we were going through the transformation that there had been no changes in staffing in the HRA. Now, I know it stands separate, but I do think that if we're doing changes across the council, I can't understand why there aren't any changes in staffing under the HRA.
Yeah, so the key driver for change within the housing revenue account will be the housing options appraisal. So we've got 2 landlord models currently, and we're working towards a single landlord delivery model. It didn't serve as any great purpose to try and alter either of those models in isolation of each other and make nominal housing staff reductions, when actually the efficiency will come from joining them together. So this council will expect to see a paper from us with a decision for April 2026, once we've been through the due process of selecting a single model.
Thank you. I just wanted to make that to be made clear to members of the public as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Not seeing any other comments from lead members or associate lead members. Any other comments from other members? Not seeing anything. No, thank you very much. So, Kirsty, Simon, thank you very much. Sorry, Kerry. Where did I get Kirsty? Kirsty, thank you. Kerry.
It's all housing.
It's all housing, isn't it? Right. Kerry and Simon, thank you very much. And move on to recommendations. The recommendations are that for the executive endorse the recommendations referred to full council for approval. Rent setting for 25-26, an increase of 2.7 on dwelling rents in line with the government rent standard, an increase of 2.7 for sheltered and extra care housing, an increase of 2.7 for shared ownership properties, and an increase in 2.7 on affordable renewal tenures. Fees and charges for 25-26. The service charges are shown in Appendix A for homes in Tatemore and Appendix B. For the in-house service, an increase in garage rents of 2.7 in the north, but at freeze in the west. An increase of 1.7 of temporary accommodation, an increase of 1.7 for meeting hall hourly rates, and an increase of 1.7 for guest room charges. To discontinue the Lifeline subsidy, and to note the revenue budget for 25-26, capital budget for 25-26 to 29-30, MTFP and 30-year business plan update will be presented to a later full council executive in February 25. I see a proposer, Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts. Can I see a seconder, Councillor Heather Shearer? Those in favour, please. Those against, that's clearly carried. Thank you very much. Amazingly, we are ahead of time. And we can certainly take the next, we just have a brief interlude while we just collect the officers. We should be able to do regional devolution proposals before lunch. Okay, looking to recommence in 1 minute. Mr. Hickson is ready and composed. Super. Okay, and thank you to members for helping us to keep ahead of schedule. It's an unusual position when I'm chairing, and I do thank you for your cooperation. So just to briefly introduce, because I was at scrutiny, I was told off for taking Paul's best lines. We have proposals before us as in response to the government's request for strategic expressions of interest in strategic regional authorities that came on the 16th of December with a request for a reply by the 10th of January, as if nothing yet happened in between those dates. But I will pass on to Paul to introduce.
Thank you very much. And just to say a little bit about the report, I want to cover a bit about the kind of national background, the approach that the council and indeed its partner authorities in the southwest are taking to the devolution agenda, and just perhaps clarify a little bit about what is being asked of the executive, indeed in the context of moving parts as well as the leader has referred to. So just in terms of covering the background, worthwhile reminding ourselves that there's nothing kind of intrinsically new about devolution and the arrival of the newish government. The last government agreed a number of devolution deals in urban areas, largely of the country, and created a number of directly elected mayors. The new government stated approach to the policy involves commitments to extend and accelerate and in some ways standardise the approach to devolution as a kind of next step, albeit with a number of similar flavours to what's gone on in the past. So there's a significant approach, a focus on the growth agenda within what statements have been made and in the white paper, and also reference to and focus on public sector reform over time as well. And the kind of sequence and background is soon after election there were ministerial statements and dialogue instigated with local authorities, leading to initial feedback being requested from local authorities about their devolution intentions in September, and then a white paper in December and a considerable acceleration of the agenda thereafter. So in the white paper, there was confirmed a strong emphasis on directly elected mayors, the trailing of the intent for there to be strategic authorities covering, I suppose, a regional scale, population threshold of perhaps 1.5 million associated with the geography of a strategic authority. And to use a phrase which gets bandied around a lot, a significant premium in terms of the devolution settlement for areas which have a directly elected mayor. And indeed the offer below, in the white paper, the offer below that kind of option is very meagre, I think it's fair to say. Since the white paper, the government has requested local authorities to state their willingness to be part of proposals in what's being called a devolution priority programme. And the intent is that the devolution priority programme effectively will be areas that are on a pathway to the standing up of a strategic authority in 26-27, and for there to be a mayoral election in May of 2026. It's fair to say that there's considerable speculation about timing and the nature of announcements about which authorities are in the devolution priority programme. That's around us in the kind of the days and moments that we're in at the moment. So just talking a little bit about our work and approach to the devolution agenda. The council has proactively engaged in dialogue with government and indeed our partner authorities across the southwest to look at our options, to feedback our thoughts about the devolution agenda, and to understand what is set out in the white paper. We've developed close working relationships and I suppose a shared suggested way forward with our colleague authorities in Dorset and in Wiltshire. And we've kind of captured that in the notion of a joint approach to devolution covering the Wessex area. We firstly set out our kind of aspirations there to government in September. There was a request for feedback to ministers by the end of September from leaders. We kind of updated based on the kind of gathering statements around the mayoral premium in November of last year, that would be interested in exploring the possibility of a directly elected mayor as that grouping authorities. And in January, the leaders of initially Somerset, Dorset and Wiltshire, and then supplemented by Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, indicated their interest in being part of the priority programme. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of realism here, in as much as that the future in terms of growth funding, longer term funding for infrastructure investment links very closely to that mayoral premium. So we're looking into the short and longer term future. There's a considerable resource opportunity alone with the mayoral strategic authority option of devolution. And if we look within or outward from Somerset in terms of our options, and recognising the fact that Somerset looks economically in a number of different directions, as do many places in kind of non-metropolitan England. To the north, the West of England Combined Authority realistically hasn't reached out to Somerset about being a partner in it in the future. And if we look to our south, the Devon authorities and indeed Cornwall are being kind of steered by government to look at working together. So looking to our east is probably the most realisable option for us in terms of a devolution approach which meets the government scale parameters. And just to be clear, going alone, given that meagre nature of the offer and the kind of the focus that government will want to give in terms of the programme of change isn't a realistic option for us either. So as well as the kind of the positive reasons of working together with those authorities in that Wessex grouping, our options alternatively aren't strong for us. So just to close a little bit by saying, obviously this is the devolution agenda is an important one. Hence the recommendations in the report combine decisions for the executive and suggested recommendations for the executive to make to full council. So there's a council-wide understanding of policy. In terms of the recommendations to the executive, obviously noting the policy direction as set out in the white paper and supporting the leader and the chief executive with us as a bit of a formalisation of their kind of role in dialogue with the other authorities. To date, it's been necessarily informal. And the recommendations to full council look at the principle of working with our authorities in the Wessex area and recognising that that would involve the notion of a directly elected mayor potentially, and the notion of being part of the devolution priority programme, obviously in context of that realism around the resource context for the growth agenda. Just to report finally that the matter was discussed, mentioned by scrutiny last week. It was a very thorough discussion. I think there was a recognition about the moving plates that we've discussed, perhaps some levels of scepticism about the appropriateness of a mayor in non-metropolitan geographies, but understanding of the kind of drivers for it, and an enthusiasm for members to be kept briefed as the policy unfolds. So I thought it was helpful just to summarise the feedback that came out of that meeting.
Yes, and in the feedback report I've got from scrutiny, the committee commented that it's keen to see a positive benefit for Somerset and ensure that government resources will be allocated to the region as a result of this devolution proposal, rather than it coming from resource and capacity within the partner councils. And yeah, those are points really well made. Is there anything else we want to add? Duncan, you twitched towards the microphone.
Taking a hint then, leader. So I think just to say this has been a really interesting piece of work. Regional partners have come together very well. We are working well together. And I think genuinely there is an economic opportunity here for the whole of the Wessex area to actually come together, align our resources and really support local businesses, local people to improve the economy and deliver both our mission for growth, but also the government's mission for growth. We just need to be given the opportunity through the devolution priority programme to do so.
Thank you. I'll just invite any comments or questions from lead members. Sarah.
Yes, I'm glad Duncan commented, because I was going to ask the chief executive to say what he thought about it, because to me this is interesting. I think it's an interesting idea. I would have preferred, in a way, there to be a kind of southwest thing, because I know we've had this before, but we've got roads and we've got transport, things like that, and things that we need to plan regionally and not just in 3 or 4 councils. I sort of slightly worry about that, and I suppose what it means is we'll have to work with the other regional authorities, or indeed individual councils if they don't form a regional authority, in order to do that. I hope it won't be a lot of talk and not very much action, and I hope there will be some funding to follow it to make it actually happen and make it worthwhile our doing. So I sort of slightly worried about it. I'm glad we're in a group of people and we've gone forward, or we're in a group of councils who've gone forward, and I thank you for the work that's been done on it. I just have my concerns about the fact the Southwest is a region really as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. Your point is well made, and certainly it's been interesting, the work of the Great Southwest, which is Devon, Cornwall, Somerset, Dorset, with BCP, Torbay and Plymouth as well, and that work has come on significantly in the last year, and it's regrettable that the funding is being pulled from the Great Southwest at the moment. But yeah, absolutely. We've been given a guide as to the optimum population and geographies that might be included. And as per the elected mayor, to the point that has been made, I think we've when at the LGA conference we came out of Jim McMahon's speech on it, I think Richard Clue and Nick Ireland and myself would have all described our position as reluctant enthusiasm, in that, okay, we've got to have a mayor, let's do it then. But we would rather, it wouldn't have been our first choice of a way forwards, but that's clearly government policy, and they hold the whip hand in this. So that's where we're going. Mike.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I entirely agree with what you've said about the perhaps the reluctant enthusiasm. I think this is the direction of travel. It was of the previous government. It is of this government. It's not really changing. So I think we very much have to grasp this and deal with it as best we can. I think the point I just wanted to make, though, is that at the outset, when we were told that we were going to become a unitary authority, the big thing was about how much simpler that would make everything. And now we have town and parish councils, many of whom have devolved functions. We have the LCNs, we have Somerset Council. We're now going to have a mayoral authority. I'm failing to see the simplification arriving.
Yeah, you forgot the Police and Crime Commissioner, the Fire Authority, and the different footprints of the NHS as well. So the public sector, while trying to simplify things, we don't half make it complicated sometimes. Anyway, that's an aside. Not seeing anything else from league members or associate league members. I've got, I think Mandy won the race by a short head to my left.
Too slow, Andy. Thank you. I'm really pleased to see the paper action. Actually, I would have liked to have seen it ahead of those Somerset sort of deciding to make that way forward. I think for a lot of councillors, this will be quite a new area. There hasn't been lots of conversation about it, so I'm pleased to see it here. So for me, there are opportunities. With that comes risks, in my view. I'd love to know who's going to scrutinise the work of the mayor and what's going and what they're going to be doing. You know, in local government, I'm sure that will happen. I hope that it happens. But for me, it's things like we're talking about local growth plans. How will that sit with our local plan, for example? How will our local plan, will it need to fit with local plans across those others in our area so that we're all aligned and can be looking for similar outcomes for our areas? So I think that there are concerns around that. And I mean, obviously the mayoralty, there's a cost and there will be an office attached with that. And I have no doubt that will grow as time goes by. If we have a look at what we're looking at here, transport, skills, employment, housing, planning, business, I would love to know how big that office might be. And let's not forget, there will be a cost for running an election. We're looking at $1.5 million, probably £1 a polling card, so you're looking at $1.5 million before you blink. Again, extra pressure on local government. So whilst there are opportunities, I think there are downsides as well, and I think the important thing is we try and balance out both to get a good deal, and we need a voice in the southwest. The north has had all the noise and all the conversation. South is seen as southeast, seen as affluent. We are not. The west of this country needs help, just like those northern areas do. And I hope that it helps to rebalance that dialogue somewhat. That's my hope for the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of points I would agree with there. I fully appreciate the difficulty of bringing forward anything as a proposal when we have very little guidance as to what it would mean. A briefing would largely have consisted of everything that was in the public domain, and every question that would have been asked would have been, we don't know yet. I know a member of briefing has been offered and is being arranged, so I'm very, very happy with to confirm that. With the scrutiny arrangements, I know West of England Combined Authority has a scrutiny committee made up of councillors of its constituent authorities, and I would imagine that something similar would be in place. Again, all subject to negotiations. I know the growth plans I know our staff have met with Wiltshire and Dorset and BCP staff already to share their homework on growth plans. We've obviously got an emerging growth plan from the Somerset Growth Board because we've taken on the LEP functions already. The point about the morality office, yeah, we would need an office block. We've got one in Yeovil, I think. So maybe, you know, just a suggestion. And yeah, the biggest point, of course, is that voice of the West Country. For me, we have a danger here that with the Council of Nations and Regions, we will have a situation where we have only the West of England Combined Authority mayor if we don't pursue this. I can't see the Devon and Cornwall one going forwards because of the level of ambiguity, discord. I'm not sure what to call it that's coming out of Devon and Cornwall councils. We've got a viable proposition here, and I would very much hope that it's looked on favourably, and we work the details out through the year. And of course, that process would need engagement from members as well as leadership within that. Paul, did you want to add anything?
You've covered a huge amount of the ground there. I think just a couple of things that I would add. Firstly, on a very specific point, the government has indicated that for the first year of the strategic authority, first 3 years, the government will provide capacity funding to cover its costs. So that's a commitment made. And I think from the scrutiny discussion, there was a point at which we talked about the kind of the strong offer that Somerset can make to a Wessex area. And we are very fortunate in terms of the kind of nationally significant things we have happening in our patch. You know them, but I'll mention them, things like the Hinkley Point C development and the Agratas opportunity at the Gravity Enterprise Zone, and what can come in the future in addition at the Enterprise Zone as well. I think our task will be making sure that that Wessex growth plan, assuming that's what we are creating, strongly emphasises those parts of the overall area's offer, because we've probably got greater opportunities in some of the other parts of the patch.
Thank you. Do you want to come back?
The only comment I would say is most people in the country won't know what Wessex is or where it is, and I think that is a challenge in naming. So I think that's the downside of not having a whole southwest voice. So thank you.
I could very much comment on the national curriculum, not including the heptarchy at any point, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. Andy Dingle.
Thank you. I think just to build on that, Somerton as the capital of ancient Wessex might be a good shout. Anyway, I'm hugely for devolution of powers away from central government back towards people who are impacted by the decisions, these things. I am a little bit concerned in the long run about taxes. We have a model here where we're devolving powers down to towns and cities, but we're not seeing a saving from the taxpayer's point of view, with the cost being picked up in increased precepts from those towns. There's a significant chance, I think, there's a significant chance that the new layer of local government will become a precepting body, taking powers from Westminster, some coming up from the constituent councils, and then charging more council tax with no reduction in income tax at the central government level or council tax at the unitary authority level. How do we protect people from this? It feels like an ever increasing kind of ratchet of taxes coming through.
I would think I would emphasise particularly that council tax is not a fair tax in the way that it doesn't take into account people's ability to pay. It's based on 1991 property value of your house, which is a ridiculous base on which to tax for something that pays for social care. You know, it might be appropriate for some of the more place-based services that we have. Are you able to give any indication of what the funding models might be if it became a precepting authority yet?
I think it's too early to say, as much as that is a stage or two down the line of the maturing of the strategic authority, and there will be tests of the kind of the competency of a strategic authority before it reaches the point of either being able to precept or indeed being able to borrow. So if we look at the journey of the combined authorities, as they're currently called, they're at different stages in their kind of evolution, and the responsibilities and powers available to them. So it's a part of that journey over time.
Briefly.
Just very quickly, whilst I'm inclined to agree with your views on council tax, generally, I think we do have to operate with the view that that's not going to change. Within 3 years, we're looking at a new precepting body, and we need to be cognizant of that when we're thinking of this for our residents.
Yeah, it's a good point. Well made. Diogo.
Thank you, Chair. My views kind of at the scrutiny committee, but I'll kind of reiterate them here. If it's going to happen, then let's join the ride. We've got no choice, so let's just do what we can and make the best of it, really, in my view. I think there are really good examples where this has worked around the country, some not so good examples, but one good example is over with Ben Houchen. And I think regardless of party politics there, you can see what he's done with Inward Investment, how he's transformed Teesside as to a really welcoming place for businesses and for the general economy as well. So it can work. I think we're proud of Somerset, we're proud of our businesses, we're proud of our people, and we are champions of our county, and we are proud champions as councillors here. So I do think this has the opportunity to work for Somerset and the region. But as I said before, and as Councillor Revans agreed with me, which is, as you said, not very often, the devil will be in the detail. So we look forward to that coming, if it does come, of course. Councillor Evans said that the decision might come today. It was meant to come previously. We don't know if it's going to come. So any kind of insight on that would be good. One criticism, I do have to criticise something very small, is the council did first express an interest back in September on this. And as was raised at scrutiny, as members, we were disappointed to not have any input or discussion about the EOI. And I think that was a missed opportunity there, because we were asked a lot by residents what's going on, is this another authority, etc., etc. So having that one-to-one on a briefing call would have been good. However, I appreciate the commitment that's been made that we will have a members briefing if this does go ahead, if the decision's made. So thank you.
Yeah, and just to reassure, at that point, it was very much the case that it was almost a Blue Peter approach to this, that we knew and announced something was coming. We didn't know what, we didn't know when, and not to have something prepared would have meant that we would have undoubtedly missed the boat. So yes, we had, and it was. I discussed with all the neighbouring council leaders what options might be available to us, and I make no apology for that, because I would want to work with neighbouring council leaders no matter what arrangements might be in place for strategic mayoral authorities, because we have to work together, because we live in the same peninsula. So it was a case of working out what was viable and what wasn't in terms of the partnerships that were open. But absolutely, the devil is in the detail on all of this. And once we've got more detail, we'll be able to know how good a deal this is for Somerset. I've got Graham and then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to remind members that following the failure that was poll tax, council tax was brought in as a temporary measure, and that, like government does, this is still a temporary measure, council tax, so it's not actually the proper solution to our problems. So we're waiting for the government to tell us what the permanent solution is, and we will share that with you when they tell us what the replacement for council tax will be. Amazing what happens on a Sunday evening between two Tory Conservative coming up with a cunning plan. The point I wanted to make, the serious point, is that I personally am fed up with seeing other regions in this country getting significant investment, whether it be from the private sector or from the state, and the South West has lost out. But we've only lost out for 100 years, so I think we've been relatively patient. We don't have the infrastructure in our key roads. We don't have the infrastructure in our rails. We have a single line on the line from Exeter to Waterloo, so trains have to stop to let another one go by. I think that's unique in a capital run. And we have problems with our electricity grid that will hold us back. There's a whole series of ways, and there are issues around public health, particularly, as you'd expect me to notice, that are far better addressed because viruses aren't too good at staying within boundaries. So I'm actually excited by the idea, more, I think, than the leader. I think this is a no matter which method it comes, there is a need for an authority at that level, and there's a need for for the government to give us a fair deal. And that's what I'm hoping will come out of this, though I appreciate the performance of various individuals have affected the success, and we just have to hope that the right person, I don't know, maybe Mike Rigby, will become the new mayor.
Well, I'm not sure whether there's a crystal ball in there or what, but Councillor Rigby.
Well, if I did make such a decision, I know who to go to for my proposer now, don't I? So, thank you very much. I just wanted to say, Leader, in response to your point about council tax, I was looking this up a little while ago and I found the cheapest property I could find in Taunton and then the most expensive property I could find for sale anywhere. And the answer was that the most expensive property anywhere was in London, in Westminster. It was £50 million. So it was almost exactly 1,000 times more expensive than the cheapest thing I could find in Taunton. And they paid roughly the same council tax. Although I would add that the record of collecting council tax on those mega properties in London is very poor because they tend to be registered in blind trusts in the Cayman Islands, so they probably pay nothing.
I think that's a rabbit hole we won't go down, but it's a bit of fascinating knowledge. I'm not seeing any other comments or questions. Just to highlight this is government policy. It is devolution from government to the regions. And the West Country needs a strong and powerful voice. And just like to thank the team who've supported on the beginning stages of this journey. We know, or it's I'm not sure it's the Grand Old Duke of York, it's the Grand Old Duke of Somerset, I suppose, being marched up and down the hill again on this devolution, and we'll see what announcement comes this week. It may have already come, and I've missed it while I was in this meeting. No, it hasn't yet. So we wait with bated breath, excitement about the opportunities that present before us. Can I propose this from the chair? Can I see a seconder, please? Councillor Rigby. I'll just read out recommendations before we do it. I'm sorry, I've just got ahead of myself there. So the recommendations are that the executive, and I've turned the page and it's a long one. So we note the publication of the government's devolution white paper and welcomes the government's devolution policy objectives as set out in the report, and including the ambition to extend the geography of devolution across the country and increase powers, functions, budgets devolved to local areas. It authorises the leader and chief executive to continue working with partner authorities and government departments, and recommends that full council endorses the principle of Somerset Council working with partner authorities to secure a devolution settlement for the Wessex area, and the ambition of the partners to be part of government's devolution priority programme. Accepts that Wessex may be joined by other authorities at a later stage, and recognises the geography of authorities within the devolution programme identified as areas for the creation of a mayoral strategic authority from 26-27, with mayoral elections in May 2026. Checking your diary there, Mike? Yeah, I thought so. Notes the potential opportunities to promote economic growth, skills and prosperity alongside the financial benefits and strategic and operational implications for Somerset Council arising from a devolution settlement and the creation of a mayoral strategic authority. That's proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Rigby. All those in favour? All those against? That's clearly carried. And we will adjourn for lunch. Are we just looking at what officers will need for the afternoon session as to whether we can start earlier than 2:05? You can adapt to suit me. So we'll reassemble at 1:15, if that's acceptable. Everyone happy with that? Yeah. Super duper. Okay. Adjourned until 1:15. Okay, I think we're ready to kick off this afternoon then. So we're moving on to item 10, which is the Somerset Homelessness and Rough Sleeper Strategy 2025-2030. Oh, just what I remember, Councillor Graham Oakes has said his apologies for the afternoon session. We're all aware that he's in recovery at the moment. So, Somerset Homeless and Rough Sleeper Strategy, and Councillor Sarah Wakefield to introduce.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I am delighted to be introducing this new strategy. As it says in the paper, it's a government requirement that we do one of these every 5 years. And this has been spearheaded by the Homelessness Reduction Board, this work that's been carried out for the new strategy. And it does include input from those with lived experience, which is obviously very important. What we've got today will be followed by an action plan, which is going to be worked on afterwards, or is being worked on now. What we've put forward here about reducing homelessness for a county where we have to say our position isn't across the council, across the country, is not particularly good, but we are ambitious for improvement, and some of the things are in place already. The National Health Service is on board with this too. They recognise how important homelessness or not having a home is to people and to their health, and it's a multi-agency approach as well. There's much of work to do across our teams, including the new local plan for Somerset, which will also have some of our home building plans involved. So I just wanted to say, I think it's a great piece of work. Scrutiny gave it a good airing, and you can see what they said, I think, in paragraph 12. But I'd like to hand over now to the officers so they can introduce it in more detail.
Thank you, Chair. So I think you all know me, but I'm Kirsty Larkins, the Interim Service Director for Housing, and I'll introduce Jan Errington, who's our lead for housing strategy and has done the vast majority of the work on this with other colleagues and is the expert. So we've got a short slideshow. Don't worry, it's not death by PowerPoint. It should be fairly succinct. Can I have the next slide, please, Mike? Thank you. So I think obviously Sarah's already covered kind of the reasons why and what we've had to, where we've had to go through, and this is a statutory requirement upon us. Next slide, please. So just a very quick recap of how long this has taken. It's not a quick piece of work. So a lot of work's gone on across partners and key stakeholders, not just in the council, but much more widely as well, with consultation running July to September. And as Councillor Wakefield's already mentioned, some really good lived experiences fed into that, which is hugely important in this area of work. And obviously we're coming today with the hope to have it adopted by the council. Next slide. I think the bits I really wanted to draw members' attention to was the vision. I'm not going to read the whole thing out because obviously you can read it and it's part of the report, but I think the key bit is about all elements of local government. This is a whole council-wide issue and it requires a whole council-wide solution and much further and beyond, and it touches on many different departments. So from planning to working more closely with adult social care, children's social care, public health. It requires everybody to be in that space and involved in that system-wide thinking. Next slide. So they came together with some high-level principles and themes, which is about early help and prevention, ending rough sleeping, and suitable affordable accommodation and support. This strategy can't come soon enough, really. We've got a 16% increase in homelessness over the last year. And at the moment, we've got the 6th highest number of rough sleepers in the country, which is a huge, huge number and not a good place to be. So this couldn't be more important. And as part of that work, we've got a commitment to hearing and acting the voice of lived experience, but also, as Councillor Wakefield mentioned, that link across with health and wellbeing and how important housing is in working across that sector. So as mentioned, the next part is developing an action plan. Work is already taking place on that, and that's very much been done with the Homeless Reduction Board. They're leading that, and again, that's a multi-partner group of people with health, obviously housing, police, probation, so huge sector across involved in that, and also our registered partners as well. So we've reflected the feedback we've had, we've got the priorities, and we're building now those actions just to provide reassurance within the financial constraints that we currently have as well. So just to sort of add reassurance there. But we have had additional funding recently from central government, which helps with us to move forward on that, especially around rough sleeping. I think that's it. Yeah, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Kirsty. Jan, have you got anything to add? Or not at this stage? Do you have anything to add, Jan, or not at this stage? No, okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for this report. It was a really interesting read. Just refer, particularly highlight the comments from scrutiny to colleagues as well contained in, that's actually in the report itself. Are there any comments or questions from league members? Heather.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for the reports. I must admit, when I first had a glimpse of these, I hadn't read them all through, and I've had spent more time actually reading through. And they're very comprehensive, all the documents as part of this suite of papers. I'm really pleased to see. A couple of comments and then a question, if I may. It's really good to see the case studies. They bring to life what people's experiences are. And no surprise, you're quite happy when I spotted the one on a care leaver. I'd obviously be interested in that, but on page 319. And I think also back on the very end of page 543, right towards the end, it's incredibly powerful to hear the voices or hear what people who go through our process say it feels like to them. And so I'm really pleased that that's going to be part of your, the work we all do collectively to improve the process. But the question I've got is about, it's on, I think it's on page 320, though it's probably mentioned elsewhere as well, but 320, just help me understand, what are the implications of there being a smaller number of households in Somerset owed prevention duty? If you wouldn't mind.
So we think that we could do a little bit better with our prevention work, especially upstream prevention. However, it's partly due to the very compromised accommodation system that's out there. So there isn't enough either social housing or private rented sector housing, and it's quite unaffordable, private rented sector, which means that people are coming to us and they're already harmless, they're already in relief, they're not in prevention. We're missing that opportunity to prevent. That doesn't mean to say that, and the strategy recognises this, that we want to do more of the prevention work and extreme prevention to catch people before they actually reach that point of homelessness. But not having enough accommodation actually does matter. It makes a difference because people are literally coming in, they're already homeless or they're about to be homeless. So our figures have fallen because of that. And it could be a combination of all of the above. And we need to do more work. There's been a couple of systems diagnostics going on between Newton looking at cross housing and Shelter looking very, very specifically at the workings of housing options. Both of those should tell us where we can get more effective and more efficient, and that will be really, really helpful in the new transformed service. But some of it is literally a sign of the times where we haven't got the accommodation, so there are more people facing literal homelessness than there used to be.
So I just want to say thank you for that, because I was concerned that I couldn't believe we had fewer people in need of preventative work. It's just we haven't identified them yet.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that's one of the key pieces of the work for the service as we go forward this year, following the sort of diagnostic from Newton, looking at the way in which we work and working much more closely with other services. So we are linking in earlier to do those preventative measures rather than it being sort of at crisis point.
Can I just add something about, and maybe the officers can actually clarify this for me, but my understanding is that if you are a traveller, you are not regarded as homeless or rough sleeping, and if you are living in a adapted van or caravan, you're not regarded as, I think this is the legislation, I think it's not just necessarily us, you're not regarded as rough sleeping. You may be homeless, or you may become homeless, but I think it's there's a bit of a kind of overlap here between rough sleeping and what people are doing to mitigate that themselves, and how we have to work in that space.
So it's complicated, I have to say.
and non-bricks and mortar folk, vehicle dwellers who are not traditional travellers, are not ethnic travellers, fall into the grey areas of the legislation. If they have nowhere, whether you're an ethnic traveller or a vehicle dweller, if you've got nowhere legitimate to park your lived-in vehicle, then you are technically harmless. So we could have a harmless duty if somebody wanted to come to us and ask for help. However, it's quite complicated in the sense of local connection. If somebody was living in a vehicle like a car or a work van that's not converted, there's no heat, there's no facilities, there's nowhere to sleep really, that's thought of as rough sleeping, because you're literally not much better than being outside other than that you dry. And we developed in conjunction with MHCLG a habitable vehicle test for the cohort that we have, because what we see is a lot of people living in vehicles that are not weather tight. They have rats in them. They're just absolutely diabolical conditions, worse than living in a shed, as you know, worse than living in a tent, or as bad as. And so that we use that test to discern whether a vehicle dweller is really rough sleeping. But this is, I think we kind of pioneered that in the country, but it's partly because we have such a large contingent. The question, because it is.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just wanted that pointed out so that people could understand that a bit better, because it's not a straightforward situation. And yes, as you say, if you're living in a car, sleeping in a car, it's not adapted for living, and you are essentially rough sleeping if you're doing that. But it's a grey area, as you said. There's a lot of differences of the way people have adapted or not adapted, but it is something we are aware of. And as you say, we're very proud to say we've done some work on it too. So that's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to welcome this report. From my perspective, it shines a light on the many challenges that Somerset faces. And I appreciate that you said our figures, we've got extremely high figures, like in the national picture. But I also do think, and then maybe it's my own personal view, there are mitigating factors, or there is a lot happening in Somerset when it comes to Hinckley. We've obviously got Gravity, all of those elements, and different town councils wanting to and have declared a housing crisis due to obviously people wanting to work and live in the West Country and then commute to London as an example. So all of that's putting pressure on the housing market. I think a briefing for local members on this would be helpful so that they can understand what they can and can't do, but also the challenges that people face. And then I also think there's something around our MPs in Somerset getting together and having one voice as to our ask of government. I know that recently Gideon's asked, who's the MP for Taunton, asked around what he could do in relation to a bill that's currently going through Parliament. And one of it, from my perspective, was around allowing us to borrow with the HRA at a lower rate of interest, as an example, so that we could do something. So I'm just wondering if we can get the MPs into one room, they can be that one collective voice to say this is what Somerset needs from central government, and it's a ready-made report.
Thank you. I think you are right. We do have a bit of a perfect storm within the county. So whilst we welcome that development, it's exciting that we've got that investment and that brings with it jobs. It has put additional pressure on the housing market. We also have the issue of sort of pay compared to the cost of housing. Is a wide gap in Somerset. We've got a lot of workers on kind of low incomes that can't afford the private sector market. One of our key things that we're lobbying on kind of nationally is around the local housing allowance. Those levels have not been reviewed for many years. They do not meet, you cannot find privately rented accommodation for the local housing allowance rates. It is just not possible. That's a huge issue for us. So even if we have got people that are proactive, and we do have people that are proactive looking for housing, trying to find some that's affordable is really, really difficult. That alongside, we need more affordable housing coming through our developments and through working with our registered partners as well.
Okay, Liz.
Thank you. I'm really glad to see Airbnb referenced in the report too, because there's a kind of particularly difficult position. If you've got a place that's very attractive to visitors, say it's not just Glastonbury, but that's probably one of our main examples, but places like Bournemouth and Bristol as well. So you get lots of rental properties come off the permanent market and become by the night, by the weekend. And then at the same time, you still have people arriving in town who believe that they will be able to find something when they get there. And we have got far too many examples of people living in really poor standard. I wouldn't even call it accommodation, but it's something that the new MP for Glastonbury and Somerton, Sarah Dyke, is kind of starting to understand now. It's not new. It's something that was happening in the 18th century when the waters were believed to be miraculous and there were thousands of people camping in the fields. But that's not the point. The point is how it is for people who are coming to town believing they can find somewhere to live, and also for the residents who do get extremely upset when they see the roadside in areas that used to be really lovely places to walk and take children and go boating and all the rest of it. And there are other places in the town where residents get extremely upset, as they did over the weekend, where we're just opening Tor Leisure again after its Towndale refurbishment. And already there are people living in the car park in vans because the height restriction barrier has not gone up yet. So you get a situation where people are saying to me, if we were in a refugee camp, you'd be kinder to us. And there's some validity in that view. And then you have other people who are saying we pay a great deal in council tax, and the taxpayers paid for this, and now we're not getting the benefit of it. So we do have a particularly difficult situation there. So I'm really glad that you've referenced it throughout the report, and that you have picked up on things like HMO and Airbnb that actually have reduced very considerably the amount of housing available, particularly to single people. And our complete lack, I was talking to my colleague Heather on the way here, where at Mendip District Council I spent 3 years trying to get some affordable and social housing built, including on council land, and not one house has been built yet. We are still waiting for them to come up to planning committee, and it's intensely frustrating that we know what we need to do, we know what we want to do, we may in places even have the land to make it possible, and that's been partly because of phosphates and nutrient neutrality. I get that, but we do need to move faster if we're going to make any difference at all. So it's just another plea from me that, and of course willing to help anywhere I can. Not sure where that is, but I'm sure the whole executive, the whole council will want to work with you in any way we can, having read this report, which is an excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, it is that whole council approach that we need, and bringing more affordable housing forward is critical. I think one interesting statistic that I've got, it's not in the report, but just recently had, is that if we wanted to house everybody with a 1-bedroom need on the housing register and housing supplied remained as it is and the numbers remained as it is, it would take us 8 years. So that's how dire it is. It's not quick. And if you need a 4-bedroom, that's 14 years. So it's a long, the demand is huge. But also we need to do that preventative work about being realistic about if people do choose to come here, what's available or what isn't available, and what that means for them. So it's kind of that combination of, we need more supply of affordable housing, but we also need to do more of that preventative work to reduce the numbers kind of coming through the system as well. And if we can start working with the private sector more, that will help relieve that pressure.
Thank you. Just wanted to add to colleagues' comments. I particularly like the use of case studies and lived experience in the report. That really sort of helped bring it to life for me. Was really pleased to see the references to our armed forces homeless community in there, and you know, it is often recognised the vulnerability of people who come out of the services and the vulnerability to homelessness. So great to see what we're doing in that area. Particularly struck by the rural homelessness that was highlighted in the report, which is not something that I'd expected to have that the numbers that were attached to that, and it all comes back to the cost of housing and low incomes. You know, we are in a situation where our housing, particularly in parts of Somerset, has become extraordinarily expensive for obvious reasons, and we do need to look at whether we can mitigate or address that further. Anyway.
Another factor is just the increasing complexity of individuals. So it's probably smaller numbers compared to the vastness of people needing housing and facing homelessness. But that we're seeing more and more levels of higher need and complexity, which we're hearing from others that is particularly a thing in Somerset. I don't know why, but that definitely means that we need to focus on the services that support those people as well. So mental health and health services, all the different things that can come in to enable somebody to sustain their home as opposed to not being able to manage it.
Absolutely, and you know, that it's those issues around mental health and around substance misuse that I think is really important, that there is a closer we've got that closer relationship with adult social care as well going forwards. I think that's all the members that wanted to comment, so go to Lucy Trimnell.
Thank you, Chair. So you've taken some of the things I was going to say on the armed forces. I echo the points that you made. I thought it was really good actually to see that the implementation of these measures, these recommendations, will reduce the risk scores from their current position. It's a good step in the right direction. There's obviously more work to go, but I recognise that the chances of ever having a risk of zero is never going to happen. Something that I wanted to talk about as well was the hidden homelessness, which is mentioned and is talked about, but I don't know. There are a lot of people who are having to live with parents well into their adulthood. We're talking often about people who have their own children who are living with parents, and I'm not convinced that those, or I'm not certain that those are always reflected in those figures. They tend to be private arrangements. They put a lot of strain on families often. One of the things that I really think we have an opportunity to do as a council now, that we are a unitary authority, is to put the pressure on developers who come forward with 35% affordable housing within their schemes, and often come back to us at a later stage to say that they need to reduce those numbers because they're no longer able to afford to deliver on them. And I think that we have an active role to play in trying to encourage developers to start building affordable housing first as early waves of development to secure those in place, and to make sure that wherever possible we don't allow, without real pressure, developers to say actually we can no longer afford to deliver on those affordable houses, because I know that it frustrates people in areas who often agree to building that they might not necessarily want, on the basis that they know that their children, their grandchildren will be able to afford to get a home, but also it's just wrong, and affordable housing is absolutely essential, I think, going forward in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Not sure I detected a question as such in there. It was more of a comment. But yes, I think your point on affordable housing is very well made, and particularly the point around the viability assessments that we so often see that give our planners very little room for manoeuvre once a developer comes forward with a viability proposal that's been authorised and puts that pressure. So it is an incredibly difficult situation the councils are put under. So yeah, your point's well made. Sarah, did you want to come back on that?
Just to say briefly on that, two things. When you were talking about building affordable housing, I think you said first, actually, I had one development I was working on out at Norton and Fitzwarren, where because of the recession and because the houses people weren't buying houses, the developer said, well, I'm just going to build the affordable houses because I know I can sell them. And my housing association said, but we don't want to be there with nobody else there. There'll be nothing else there. I said, no, there won't be anything else there, but you have agreed to buy them and they are going to build them first, which is what actually happened. So they don't do that unless they can't get any money from anywhere else. That's what they tend to do. Secondly, with regard to viability, something needs to be done about this nationally. It is a scandal that there are people online offering to get you out of having to build any affordable houses in your development. There are companies out there come to me as a developer and I will get you out of having to build any affordable houses. Now, we've got so many things crowding out affordable houses. Obviously, viability is part of them, but the other things we have to do. And I have to say, I'm pleased to see that the government is saying that spending £100 million on a bat corridor is a ridiculous thing to do, actually, on, I think this HS2, isn't it? But, to spend so much on something which, yes, it's important. Wildlife is very important, but so are people's lives. And I think we need to think about that. And that some balance needs to be done about viability and how it works and what other things developers are being asked to do as well. But, I don't have a great deal of sympathy with developers, I have to say, but I do want more affordable houses and I do want this government and whatever strings can be pulled to make sure that we do get our proper amount of affordable houses in those developments, which, as you say so rightly, are passed in places where people don't really want developments at all, but they do want the affordable houses. Thank you.
Mandy.
Thank you very much, Chair. So thank you for the report. Couple of questions, if I may. Actually, just to raise a point, a few years ago, there was a survey of young people carried out around West Somerset, and their top concern was homelessness. Not open spaces, not anything else. It was homelessness. So this is really on the minds of our young people from a young age, and I don't think it helps them to have those concerns. So just to pick up, really concerned to read how many that are homeless have mental health. That was issues, over 80%, physical health, over 80%. Ex-offenders, those affected by addiction. Now, my concern about that is quite often they end up going round and round and round in our system because we might find them somewhere to be, but then because of all their other challenges, they lose that place to be and then end up back homeless again. So, and I think this is really highlighted in the case studies. And I was reading have been placed in numerous supported accommodation options across Somerset, which have all been unsuccessful, and he felt that none were right for his mental health. That's something I've had experience of and seen a lot. So my question is, in reality, how do you stop that cycle if you're aiming for zero? That's my first question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you want me to?
I'll go. Sorry.
Go on.
I think there's some system things that we are looking to do and starting to do. So we're working much more closely with adult social care and that Care Act and those care needs as well, and trying to make sure that we worry less about whether it's Homeless Act, Care Act, and actually what do we do with the person to enable them to succeed, and how can we work more closely together, but also starting some work more closely with public health as well, and again about how we commission those services, and are we commissioning the right services for people, because I think sometimes we think we've got the right answers, but they're not quite the right answers, those service users, and that's where that lived experience is so important to be brought into that, to make sure that we can try and address those needs. But also, I think one of the things that helps us succeed is we've got a variety of different providers, and that's really important. So if someone doesn't succeed in one supported accommodation or one housing unit, there are options for them to be able to go to another one. Whereas if we move to a model where it's just one provider, it's kind of one strike, unfortunately, people are out. So there's a number of things that we're doing to try and address those with other colleagues.
Different types of support are available. So it's finding the right thing for each individual, wrapping a team around the individual, because you're basically talking about very complex people, and homelessness itself will exacerbate their issues, but their issues are probably what caused it in the first place. And it's you just, I think I wrote it in the strategy, never give up. You've got to find a way, because ultimately there is a path for everyone. It's just making sure that you tailor everything to the individual and find what works and build on their strengths.
Thank you. And I know it happens. I know it keeps happening, and I just hope that work can go on to get people out of that cycle. My next question really is around, there are a lot of families I know that have, as Lucy said, have returned home. You know, mum, dad, 2 children have turned up into a 2-3 bedroom bungalow to live with mum and dad because they cannot afford the rent locally. You know, 6 people living in a 2-bedroom flat, you know, sleeping in kitchens. So my concern is none of these people actually will be within our figures because they're in I'll call it a safe place. But they are on the edge of being homeless, in that, you know, that family could break down at any point with those extra pressures. So it's just that reassurance around that, I'll call it edge of homelessness field, and the work that's going on there to stop an emergency, I guess.
It's where we want to be working more upstream with those preventative measures. So we are aware of, not of everybody, but some of those families through our work with the housing register. So when people obviously apply to go onto the housing register, they are asked questions about who else is in the household, who's moving with them, and assessed for overcrowding and other things. So we do have some quite rich data there. It's about using that data more effectively as we go forward to do some targeted work with those people we think are, you know, just on that edge of going to become homeless. We don't have a magic solution. I think you've heard that today, but at least if we can get some advice in there earlier and sooner, and even if we can't stop that, it's delaying sometimes so that people can make a planned move. So sometimes mediation can work and keep things steady for a few months until it's a planned move into suitable accommodation rather than a sort of crisis move. So we have got some data, but that's not reflected in those homeless statistics.
No, and that accounts for people who live in housing associations or who are on the register wanting to move in. It won't account for anybody who's staying in owner-occupied accommodation or private rented accommodation with their families.
Thank you. That was the reason I raised it. I think we will have probably thousands in Somerset in that scenario that could potentially need council support, and I think it's unknown and unseen to a degree. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joe Ranald Green. Joe.
Yes, thank you very much for this report. It's very sad to see how just in the space of a few years the numbers have increased so dramatically from what they were a few years ago. And I know at South Somerset we had no one in bed and breakfast, and the people on the streets, we managed to find accommodation for them all overnight. But what I really want to say, I have a planning application in my ward for 39 affordable homes. It's just only affordable homes, and it's stuck in planning, and it has been for months. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in this situation. And this isn't helping. That's an awful lot of houses for people to live in. And I just wonder, all the wonderful work that Sarah's team are doing, keeping older people in their homes, there's probably some sort of knock-on effect where we aren't freeing up houses where people might have gone into care, which I absolutely don't agree. I think it's great to keep people in their homes for as long as possible, but all these other factors that play into our hands, and it makes it extremely difficult. But I'm sure this is going to be coming back to us, and I hope that we will get to see a regular update on the figures for the homelessness and the rough sleeping and how this is going, because this is the worst time of year. But I think that we all forget about people who are sleeping outside when the weather gets a bit warmer. So I would really like to see some figures coming back, how this is playing out during the summer months, so that we can see what sort of trends we've got. But thank you very much.
Just to respond back on the figures, they will start forming part of the corporate performance report, because I know it hasn't been as clear and transparent as it could be. So we've already spoken to the corporate performance team to ensure that we do have some of those key figures that members and obviously the public can have oversight on and see.
Just add what you were saying, Joe, about keeping people in their homes for longer, which we are doing successfully. I think that societal change is a bigger factor than just that. I mean, we've got people wanting to live independently, families breaking up, people having, children with single parent needing more bedrooms, but a lot of people needing single person accommodation. And that is a societal change that's been happening for some time, which frankly we haven't been keeping up with the way we build housing. And that, that is a problem. We are aware of it and it will be taken into account. But I don't think it's just keeping people in their homes for longer that's causing this problem.
No, indeed. There's probably a societal point at one point in the past where quite often elderly parents went to live with their children, and now we've ironically kind of reversed the situation that children are going to live with their parents, which is somewhat paradoxical, but we are where we are. I'm not seeing any further questions or comments. I think that was a really good discussion of the issues, and thank you, Kirsty, and thank you, Jan, for bringing that report and our recommendations before us to consider and acknowledge the SHRSS consultation response, to consider the comments from the scrutiny, adults and health set out in paragraphs 11, 12 and 13, agree and adopt the Somerset homelessness and rough sleeper strategy 25-30, and delegate authority to the Executive Director, Adult Services and Housing, to bid for grant funding as opportunities arise, and to approve any changes which may be required due to any legislative or central government policy changes. That's proposed by Councillor Wakefield and seconded by Councillor Lyshon. Those in favour, please show, and those against. That's clearly carried. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Kirsty. Okay, we're moving on to item 11, which is complaints policy review and annual feedback report. And I'd like to invite Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to bring this report to us today. It covers two sections. First is a review of our complaints policy that we look to do annually, but also the annual feedback report that gives a lot of data, as you can see within the paper, on how the different executive directorates are working in relation to their complaints, but also their compliments. I do want to highlight that, because actually we should look at what we do well as much as what we should do, obviously analyse when things haven't quite gone to plan. We've got Rebecca and Sarah here for any complex questions, so I'll hand over to them just to highlight anything that you want to bring in at all.
Yes, two things then. So the first thing is looking for exception and adoption of the new customer feedback policy from the 1st of April. We're required to revise it each year, or to look to see whether it needs revision each year. This year the revisions are quite slight, or proposed revisions, and there's sort of two reasons for that. One is firstly because we brought it together when we formed a unitary council in line with the recommendations of Ombudsman's best practice, and we feel that it's pretty safe to stick with that, given the sort of the oversight the Ombudsman does have on our complaints. The Ombudsman have released a new code of practice, which we're due to implement fully by April 2026. But we thought that actually, you know, if we could get our policy ready for that by this year, then that would be a really good thing, and it gives us the year to sort of make sure that we've got all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. The main issues of revision really are very small. First one is around the timescale. Currently, our timescale is 10 working days, which includes an acknowledgement period of 3 days. The Ombudsman Code is stating that we should have acknowledged a complaint within 5 days of receipt, and then from the date of acknowledgement, we should then resolve it fully within 10 days. So it gives us a slightly increased time frame, which is quite useful because we are struggling to meet the existing time frames as things stand. The second sort of significant revision in the policy is that we have included a statement with regards to remedy. It's always been a sort of a tricky one for us, because we don't want to sort of, you know, set expectations too high in terms of what we can deliver as remedy. But the Ombudsman is very keen that we do start to address remedy for complaints prior to them ordering us to do so as a result of their investigations. So we have put a statement in there which is quite short and sweet, but it really just says that we will address remedy in line with the local government ombudsman's recommendations for remedy. First and foremost, it will always be around looking at what we've done wrong, if we've done something wrong, apologising for that and seeking to put that right at the point that we discover it. On some occasions, it may be that we do need to offer financial remedy to complainants. I don't think that necessarily that will increase as a result of this, because generally speaking, where there is a need for substantial financial remedy, that is ordered through the Ombudsman, and we always do comply with that. But the purpose of the new handling codes is to encourage us as local authorities to think about that sooner in the process, and obviously make it less time consuming and frustrating for the customers, which I think is what we would all want. So those are the key changes in the policy that we're recommending. The second part that I was going to talk about today was the customer feedback policy. We're required annually to do the customer feedback report. We're required annually to do a report in relation to children's social care performance, but we've always taken the view as a council that it's worth doing across the whole piece so that we understand complaints in detail around all of our services. So that's what we've done. The highlights of that, I guess, are that complaints did increase in the first year of unitary 23-24 by about, we think, 30% on what we had previously received as 5 different councils. That's not all bad news. I think part of that is because actually it's a lot easier to raise a complaint in the new unitary council, because we do have an online self-service option there, which wasn't available in all of the 5 councils before. So it means firstly that people are finding it easier to raise complaints, but also that the recording is much more thorough because people are submitting them themselves. So it goes into the system directly from the customer. So I think that's part of it. The other part of the increase, certainly, or another part of it, is that a lot of customers have logged complaints when actually they should be requests for service rather than complaints, because there's a misunderstanding sometimes about what that difference is. And we are working with the web team to try and sort of refine that, to try and sort of weed those out before they get to the complaint system, but we still do get a lot through. Sometimes my team see them and pull them out and push them down the request for service route before it hits the complaints process, but sometimes services have already taken them into the complaints process, at which time we don't feel necessarily we want to then say, no, actually this isn't a complaint, this is a request for service, because that just is very poor experience for the customer. So we're working on that to lower that. I think probably there is an element of increased complaint just because actually, you know, things are pretty tough at the moment and some things are not going quite so well as they might. And that's where we're using this data to figure out what those things are. And I have spoken before in scrutiny and in pre-exec around the work we're doing around SEND particularly, where we've had a large number of complaints, and there are some, national problems which are causing us problems, but also some local things that we are addressing. And we've got a new way of working with the Ombudsman around the remedy and around how we deal with those that we're just sort of rolling out now. So hopefully we'll see some improvement in that area. And I think that's probably all I need to say, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Just looking around for questions. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Sarah. Not questions, but I just want to add a little bit because you've touched on the SEND. When you look at the annual feedback reports, really both things are helpful. The policy I support completely, and the annual feedback report is so important, so we can see how well we're doing and not doing, and get that data out, which is really useful. One of the things that I was very keen on when I got into this role was, when I was asked last year about what my top 10 objectives might be, one of them had to talk about complaints, because we know what our inboxes look like. And I think that setting ourselves, and the service are very supportive of this, that we should improve the way we deal with complaints. And I think also increase the resolutions earlier in the process was the kind of thing we talked about. And that's what I reported in the annual report in June. So it's really important to do. And I wanted to we all wanted to acknowledge the increase in complaints as you have. I think, and pointing to the SEND area, of course, in an earlier paper today, we've heard that one of the things that we want to do anyway is, as part of the restructuring, is to improve the way we structure our SEND and inclusion and education function to help us get upstream for some of these issues. So that's part of what we want to do. But I also want to say that, we absolutely see the principal on the complaint side. The principal cause is timeliness, then it's communication, and then quality of service. And that's very, dear to all of our hearts. It's important. Similarly with the LGO or the LGCSO, the local ombudsman, local government ombudsman, the findings of those, that 37 out of 46 upheld, which is nobody wants to see. And you've talked about what we're doing to improve it, but delays in communications are part of that as well. And naively, I always think of communication as one of the free things you can do, because how you speak to people, how you reply to people can actually help to stop that complaint going further. Sometimes it's the way we say things as well as what we say. So lack of sufficiency, of course, is a problem, but also some of it's around our team capacity. So I know Claire's here and she can tell me the bits I miss out, but there's already a lot of things already going on. We meet weekly, or at least the head of the children's services with the head of the service itself and yourself meet weekly to look at all of the really difficult complaints, so that we have that spotlight on a weekly basis. And there's also the spotlight on it through working with the LGO. So it's just a kind of a bit of assurance that we are trying to change this pattern so that it doesn't reflect at the end of the year. Did you want to add anything else on that one? No. Okay, thanks. Good. Thanks for that.
I think it's also worth saying if we do start to address the remedy side of things sooner within the complaints, rather than remedy only, but particularly financial remedy only being given when a complaint gets to an ombudsman decision. If we start to address that sooner, then it may mean that we see fewer ombudsman cases, because that's sometimes why it goes to the ombudsman is to achieve that final outcome.
Thank you. Not seeing any more comments from league members, so over to Mandy Joko.
Thank you very much, Chair. So very much welcome the report, but it does make concerning reading in some areas. I think the challenge for me is, when's a complaint a complaint? For me, it's anybody that's we fail their expectations could be a complaint. I also have concerns there'll be a lot here that probably aren't reported, and if I pick up, for example, residents that might be complaining about something over and over and over again, might be a pothole, but when it's reported numerous times by one person, that really should be a complaint, but actually it just keeps going around that sort of highway system. So I think there's probably more than we can see. My other area is concerned, there are complaints that are just not responded to. And when you're in that scenario, you cannot go to the ombudsman. So then people get more and more upset, more and more frustrated. So we really, really, really must respond to complaints, because if we don't, they can't even get to the ombudsman, because the ombudsman will kick it back and say, you have to get some kind of resolution to your complaint. So that's a concern I I have a feeling the numbers are more than we're seeing, and I think that's partly feeding into it from experience I've had with residents. But thank you.
Yes, we do. We do take the approach with something like a pothole or any other problem that somebody's reporting. If it's the first time they've told us about it, it's a request for service. But if they come to us and say, I've reported this and actually still nothing's been done about it, and by that they've not heard anything wrong. So if a pothole had been assessed and they've been told, well, actually, we're not filling it because it doesn't meet the criteria, we wouldn't take that forward as a complaint. But if they said, well, I've reported it once or twice, 3 times and not heard anything, then we would take that forward as a complaint, because it becomes, it's not a service request if you keep having to make it time and time again.
And just to respond to that, and I've asked this question before, councillors, we sometimes will try, I've got one in my inbox at the moment, 10 months, and I still haven't had a response to it, and I'm still going. So should councillors be using it? I only ask that because sometimes the response can be much quicker going through a complaint process where you've got your timescales than when you keep asking the same question over. So, you know, is there something you need to do for councillors to feed into a similar process?
Strangely, that question was going through my mind, but I dare not ask it. Duncan.
Yeah, if you've got complaints which aren't being dealt with, then send myself, Sarah, Rebecca, the complaint number. I think the issue is with the word complaints, things that have gone into services and haven't been responded to, we won't necessarily know centrally that they're there. If it's actually registered as complaints in the complaint system, we see reports on a regular basis about all complaints, how long they're taking, how long they're outstanding. Some are very delayed because they're about things that maybe say, well, this planning application has not been dealt with, it haven't been decided yet, we can't decide on the complaint. So some can take a very long time. But within there, if there are complaints you've got in the complaint system that aren't being responded to, let us know, and we'll at least find out why not, if that's appropriate. And if it's not appropriate, we'll chase it through. That's what we do. I was just, if I could, lead, just wanted to pick up on the point earlier. We've also, it's not something we do very regularly, but if we have mishandled something, you know, which the complaint system rarely does, to be fair, but say that's problem with word complaint, what does that actually mean? And someone wants to go to the Ombudsman, we do have the ability to say, actually, we will let them go, even though we haven't looked at it through our complaint system at stage 1 and stage 2. And we do that where we think it's there to do so. So if we clearly got something wrong and it's stopping someone going to the Ombudsman, we'll sometimes forego the stage 2 and let the Ombudsman deal with it so the complainant can get there quicker. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do if something has happened or complainant particularly frustrated. So there are ways around that if that was the situation. But again, this is on the basis that when we say the word complaint, we mean something that's formally in the system. If it's something that's gone to a service, it's not been raised as a corporate complaint, we don't have that visibility.
Councillors?
I thought I'd cover the council point. If you've got, it's exactly the same answer. If you've got a complaint in the complaint system and it's not been progressed, let us know, and we'll come back to you on why that's the case. If that's appropriate, we'll explain why, and if it's not, we'll obviously chase it through. But the complaint system is fairly well monitored, but there are many, many more things within the council that people say are complaints that aren't within the corporate complaint system. And I think that's where quite a few things do fall through the gaps, as you were saying earlier.
Subtle difference. If a councillor's got something in their casework that they are not getting responded to over a very long period, so I'm not meaning one that a resident's telling you, it's where you've got something in the casework.
Yeah, sorry, misunderstood. So one of the things we will be looking at doing, assuming the budget goes through, is trying to increase the capacity we've got for some case management for councillors, which will give you the opportunity to have some support to chase some of those things through the system for you. We're going to have to suck it and see in terms of how many people we can afford to put into that system versus how much work they get given. But that would allow that to happen. If eventually councillors have got things with services and they've raised it, it's not being dealt with, then I think it is quite legitimate to put that as a complaint into the system. You know, every complaint needs fixing because we owe people an answer and we need to do it properly. But also every complaint is an opportunity for us to understand why it went wrong and make sure we don't do it again, hopefully. So I'd much prefer we knew about it rather than you were politely sat with it, not getting an answer for you or your constituent. If it should go in as a complaint, it should go in as a complaint.
Thank you.
And that's for you as well, Leader.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just looking round, councillor Wakefield, Sarah.
Sorry, could I just ask a question which I haven't asked, but I apologise for that. But I'm just looking at the ombudsman complaints and decisions, page 39, I think it is, and it's quite interesting because actually they are all housing one. But is there any sort of benchmark? I mean, it said over 22 cases, 14 were closed by, and I think 6 were upheld. Do we know what that compared with other authorities at all?
The Ombudsman every year puts up their sort of statistics for each council. So there's an interactive map and you can click on a council and you can look at what the statistic were percentage, and you can look at similar sort of councils in terms of their population and the services they issue. So we do have that. It doesn't make for great reading at the moment. We're not miles off. Where we tend to be worse than other councils is that we haven't dealt with the remedy aspect of it previously. We've talked about it over many. I've been in this role for quite a few years, and we have talked about it, and it was always something we were a little wary about doing in terms of not wanting to build that sort of compensation culture. But I think it's something we're going to have to start. Well, we're definitely going to have to start doing more proactively now, because it is something that the Ombudsman are very keen that we do prior to. So that's where we tended to compare quite poorly, is that other councils are perhaps being a bit more proactive with their financial remedies than we've been in the past.
I believe the chief executive might find the answer in numerical terms.
I was just pointing out in the attachment, which is the annual feedback report, it does give you some of the averages. So on the point Ms Martin was just making around remedy and advanced, we're achieving 7%, the average is 13. In terms of complaints upheld, we're at 90%, the average of similar councils is 79. So it is in there, but it's in quite small print, but we do get the data, don't we? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. No other comments or questions. We'll move on to the recommendation. The recommendations are: the executive are recommended to agree the adoption of the revised complaints policy from the 1st of April 2025, and the executive are recommended to sign off the 23-24 annual feedback report and approve publication of it to the council's website. Proposed Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts, seconded by Councillor Wilkins. All those in favour, all those against, that's clearly carried. And Sarah, Rebecca, thank you very much for bringing this report and for all the work you do. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to item 11, the determination of the 26-27 Somerset Council admission arrangements. And I'd like to invite Councillor Heather Shearer to introduce the item.
Thank you very much. And I guess thanks for making it to the end of the meeting. This one is, I remember doing this time last year, actually. So this is our annual, admission authorities like ours, we are required by School Admissions Code and associated legislation to determine our admission arrangements annually, and we do that as the exec on behalf of the admission authority. We've just run a consultation for the admissions arrangements for 26-27, and this paper just brings a request for us to endorse any changes. The only change this year in the admissions arrangement from say last year is a change to decrease the number. It's the PAN number, the published admission number, for one school, Holway Park in Taunton, from 60 to 45. But everything else within our admission arrangements stays the same. Why? Somebody just very kindly, nicely whispered in my ear. Thank you, Sarah. To say, why did we go down from that to that? I could do an amateur answer, but we've got Phil here, and Phil will explain why there's been a need to reduce that. It's going to be some kind of capacity issue, but I'm sure he'll tell you what that is. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, councillor Shearer. Phil, the professional answer.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, this is to determine our admission arrangements for local authority and maintained community schools and voluntary controlled schools. We have to determine by the 28th of this month, typically 18 months ahead of the admission year in question. We undertook a public consultation between the 2nd of December and the 20th of January this year, and we had 3 responses to that consultation. The only change within our admissions arrangements was the reduction of the published admission number at Holway Park Primary School in Taunton. What we have seen in the Holway Park community is a reduction in the number of children requiring places in that school. There isn't any housing growth, and it's compounded by our falling birth rates across the county. So whilst we are reducing the number of children going into that school, which will have an adverse impact on the school's budget, we are hoping to use that emerging latent physical capacity to increase the number of places for children with education, health and care plans. So there is a secondary benefit to that change. In terms of the 3 responses to the consultation, one related to the Armed Forces Covenant, and whether there was a way to give children from Armed Forces families more priority. I can confirm that the arrangements are aligned to the Armed Forces Covenant Act 2022, and that we have to strike a fine balance in terms of making sure reasonable adjustments are in place for that cohort of children without giving them an advantage. Also, it's worth noting that children in Armed Forces communities tend to join the school in year rather than conveniently through the cyclical arrangements. So these admission arrangements wouldn't apply to those in-year transfers. The second consultation response was about prioritising out of catchment siblings, or giving them the same priority as in catchment siblings. And in Somerset, we have a local first approach, so we prioritise school places for local children. To prioritise out of catchment siblings would disadvantage children without a sibling living in catchment, meaning that they would have to attend a school other than their local school, which would also risk increasing our school transport budget. And then a third very late response was in 2 parts. One about the use of straight line distances. Now we're in a unitary authority, and I can confirm that already within our admissions arrangements, we use straight line distance as a tiebreaker mechanism, but it also referred to a feeling that intelligence and a desire to learn and emotional aspects should be more of a part to play rather than how close they live to a school. We don't have schools in Somerset with selective admissions arrangements. We don't plan to in the future either. So we've undertaken the consultation, we've had 3 responses. We don't believe we need to change our arrangements in respect to any of those responses. So we're just seeking the executive to approve the determination of those arrangements for next year.
Mine's just a quick question, Phil, and maybe it's something that you can brief the local ward members on just in relation to Holway. I'm adjacent to it and live right by it, but I'm just wondering whether you can just explain the knock-on impact, if that's been thought about for like the Blackbrook, the Trinity, the Thirlbys, because that area of town slightly all move round into schools. I appreciate that there's catchments, but people cross through, and I know Holway as an example do take from Taunton East from the Holcombe estate. So just making sure that then how that impacts moving around, and where Holway normally feeds, I think, into Bishop Fox's, and then rather than Monkton Wood, just that kind of thought process.
Thank you. So you're correct that we do get some movement around Taunton, typically because of preference. So right now we have fewer children in that part of Taunton than we have school places. What our schools need to assure themselves of is that they are reducing their class. So when pupil rolls are falling, that directly impacts on their revenue streams, and they have to make sure that their class structures and therefore their headline costs are appropriate given the reducing revenue stream. So as a local authority school, We looked at the projected numbers, not just in the catchment, but the local community, making sure that we had sufficient school places for children in all of the surrounding catchments. Having done that work, we were comfortable in reducing the pound at Holway to 45 from 60 to allow the school to restructure and ensure it is able to fit within its budget. Should we need to reverse that in the future, that's something that we can do. But we do have the emergence of Orchard Grove to the south of the town, which is also picking up some of the slack.
Not seeing any other comments from executive. Any other members wish to comment? Nobody's catching my eye. No. Okay. Just to add to your point earlier about armed forces, children having taught in Locking, the school that covers Locking catchment and Norton Manor catchment, particular issue of in-year admission, and how the educational disadvantage that puts pupils under, but that's a side issue to this. Okay, so we move on to the recommendation. So the recommendations are that the executive agrees to determine the admission arrangements for all local authority voluntary controlled and community primary schools for the 26-27 academic year as set out in the report, and to determine the admission arrangements for all local authority voluntary controlled and community secondary schools for the 26-27 academic year as set out in this report. Proposed by Councillor Shearer, seconded by Councillor Wilkins. Those in favour, those against, that's clearly carried. Phil, thank you for the report and thank you for all your work on this important topic. Thank you. And finally, it falls on me to inform you that our next executive meeting is in February the 19th, which will be at the Luttrell Room, County Hall, which will be an interesting change from the John Meikle Room. And being no further business, declare the meeting closed at 23 minutes past 2, which is significantly ahead of schedule. Enjoy the extra time, folks.